Hello, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. Thank you very much for bearing with me, but we are here to talk about Daenerys Targaryen in A Dance with Dragons today, and I'm going to start off with a dramatic reading to set the tone. How many dead? Resnack wrung his hands. 9 magnificence, foul work it was, and wicked. A dreadful night, dreadful. 9. The word was a dagger in her heart. Every night the shadow war was waged anew beneath the stepped pyramids of Meereen. Every morn the sun rose upon fresh corpses, with harpies drawn in blood on the bricks beside them. Any freedman who became too prosperous or too outspoken was marked for death. 9 in one night, though. That frightened her. So if Dany dies at the end of the story, I think it will be for her people, not for killing her people. If this dagger to the heart language is to be seen as foreshadowing, which it obviously could be, consider the context here. The news that her people are dying is what stabs Dany. Why? Because Dany cares more about protecting her people than literally anything else. She's demonstrated that when she chose to stay in Meereen at the end of A Storm of Swords and heading back to Westeros, and also with every sacrifice she makes in Meereen that we're about to discuss. What this passage tells us is that if she is what it tells us is that she is an incarnation of the classic mother goddess, and that a wound to her people is a wound to her. A murder of one of her own stabs Dany in the heart. How then could anyone see her ending as deserving to be stabbed because she roasted her own people with dragonfire? Doesn't make sense, does it? And with me to talk about all the sacrifices that Dany makes for her people is the one and only Alisa Patience, making her mythical astronomy debut. Say hi, Alisa.
Hi. You can call me Allie if you want. I am not a YouTuber or anything like that. I'm just a big nerd and an English major who's obsessed with Game of Thrones and Daenerys, because I am her. So I just wanted to come and give some suggestions to LML. And then he so graciously invited me to join him. I am unworthy.
And you have so graciously blessed us with an outstanding Daenerys cosplay to elevate the atmosphere of the show today. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
As you pet baby Drogon there. All right. So Allie it is, and you've got a couple of blog links, which I will drop in the chat.
Cool.
There's one. And here is your WordPress. busyqueenbee.wordpress.com.
Thank you, Bal.
What kind of stuff do you write about on there?
Whatever I want, really. I did episode reviews for all of season 8 of Game of Thrones, and I do life experience stuff. I do some mental health stuff. I basically just write about whatever I want. Movie reviews, anything.
Awesome. Well, the first thing I read on there was very interesting about aesthetic. And so, yeah, check it out, guys. And it looks like your camera just snapped into higher resolution. That was nice.
Oh, cool.
It was a little garbly at first. Now we can see the full detail of your cosplay. This is excellent.
Perfect.
All right. So we've got a lot to cover today. And the way that Alisa got on the stream was she contacted me after Storm of Swords, sent me some of her notes that she had for Dance, which were excellent. And we chatted about them a little bit. And she's going to bring a little different angle to the analysis today. And we will get to that. We're going to talk about Cinderella and some of the cool mythical parallels that Dany has to Cinderella. But first, let me lay out some of the themes that we'll be running with today. I've organized these Dany streams in a few different ways. Sometimes we go just in order chronologically. Sometimes we've broken them out into topic. With this one, I'm just going to lay out a couple of the themes that we're going to be talking about, and then we're just going to plow into the narrative, and we'll sort of come back to these themes as they go through. So first thing, and these aren't really themes so much as plot elements, actually, but the first 3 things that we're going to see is this conflict between her dragon children and her human children. And this can also be phrased as the seeming dichotomy between her dragon identity and her Mysa identity. One is she's the mother to her people. The other one is the dragon, fire and blood, violence and destruction, all that stuff. So in Meereen, there's obviously a lot of this. She's, like I mentioned, chained up her dragons to keep her people safe. So she considers herself a mother of dragons and a mother to all these people. Those things will come in conflict. Second thing is this war with the Sons of the Harpy that you just heard about in the quote that we read to open. They're killing people all over the place. Euron's Tacos, 666 Super Chat. Thank you very much. I need to plug in my theremin, so I'll just give you a woo, woo, woo for now, but thank you. And so War with the Sons of the Harpy, that's the second one. Third running plot theme is the floppy ears. Dany has to wear the floppy ears, the Meereenese garb, as a part of trying to get Meereen to buy into the new order. And it's not just the floppy ears, it's all the various things that she participates in to try to get the Meereenese to buy in. And then, of course, we'll continue talking about things that we've discussed in all the previous Dany streams, such as her desire for family, and, of course, her relationship to violence and power, how she uses those two things, how she views those two things. And, of course, we're going to definitely talk about Dany smashing the slave trade, which is a major plot point in A Dance with Dragons as well. So to outline those three things, we'll start with choosing between her children. I grabbed this quote as an example of this, and it says, her dragons were growing wild of late. Rhaegal had snapped at Eyrie, and Viserion had set Resnak's Tokar ablaze the last time the Seneschal had called. I've left them too much to themselves, but where am I to find time for them? So not only has she locked her dragons down in the pit, she doesn't even have time to visit them. When she goes and sees them, she's like, oh, they've grown a lot, so she's not going down there every day. She's kind of rebelling against this side of her, and we're going to see that she's a little bit horrified by what the dragons can do. Isn't that right, Allie?
Yes. I also like the where am I them? Just it's a little thing, but what is one of the main issues of Cinderella's story but running out of time? But that's a smaller thing. But I think her relationship with her children and her role as a mother and her role as a queen, they're the same, really. She only wants to be a queen she actually loves and people who are good, such as the freed slaves and her children. Because when the noblemen call her mother, she says, I'm not your mother. I'm the mother of the people you oppressed. And that's just really important and part of what makes her a good person. She knows her morals. She knows who she is.
Yes, she does. And even though other people try to project their image of what she should be doing onto her, she retains that identity. And that's a thread that we'll be following. So let's see. I'm hearing something about
my mic.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. So they must be getting something different than what's going on. It says it sounds better now. We'll just let us know, guys, if there's something weird, but don't worry about it for now, Allie. We'll just keep rolling and it'll tell us if it's messy. But
okay.
So there you go. She's not only is she delaying her ambitions for Westeros to take care of Meereen, she's tends to make decisions in favor of her human children over her draconic ones all through this book. Locking the dragons away is a big one, and this is of course in response to Hosea being killed by a Drogon. Well, probably killed, but so the war with the Harpy, you guys know what's going on here. This was in both the show and the books. A Dance with Dragons basically opens with Dany just having conquered Meereen and having decided to stay and rule. The murder victims of the Harpy sons begin turning up. Why don't you read this quote for me, Allie?
Okay. I am still at war, Dany realized. Only now I'm fighting shadows. She had hoped for a respite from the killing, for some time to build and heal.
And of course, Dany's dragon, as always, is woken by harm being done to her people.
Find these cowards for me. Find them so that I might teach the Harpy sons what it means to wake the dragon.
Right. So you can see this is, again, keeping in line with the times that she shows anger and wrath. It's always when her children are at risk. They're being murdered in the streets. And, this is going to lead Dany to get pretty hurt and pissed and all kinds of things. So one of the things that she's dealing with is that she feels powerless to stop the Harpy sons because they're no longer on a battlefield opposing her. And so they're going to require a little more guile to deal with. And go ahead and get this quote for us.
Okay. Right here.
Cool. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. As a cool blue dawn broke over the city, Dany walked out onto the terrace. To the west, sunlight blazed off the golden domes of the Temple of the Grace and etched deep shadows behind the stepped pyramids of the mighty. In some of those pyramids, the sons of the Harpy are plotting new murders even now, and I am powerless to stop them.
So you can really feel that pain. And there's a couple more scenes like this where she's up on the pyramid and she's looking out over the city. She's thinking about how to stop the murders, how to contain the dragons, all her problems, basically. That's why I picked that shot of Dany atop the pyramid for the title image of this one. All the other title images I've shown, ones with like her face very up close, a lot of emotion. But this Dance with Dragons book is very challenging, both for the reader and for Dany. And I felt like that picture sort of encompassed it. Like she's, there's a real clash here. There's a real tension. She wants to bring peace, but she doesn't know quite how to. And she's basically coming to understand that upending an unjust social order is easier than instituting a new one. And that is true, of course, in real history as well. So we'll continue with that theme, but let's talk about the floppy ears, which is a fun metaphor. They serve as a metaphor for the idea that a queen belongs to her people, which is the title I chose for this episode. Go ahead.
Dany rose. You must excuse me, sir. The petitioners will soon be at my gates. I must don my floppy ears and become their queen again. Summon Resnick and the Shave Pate. I'll see them when I am dressed.
You've been declared the fourth head of the dragon by Rachel.
Aw, thank you so much.
That's
I'm blessed.
High praise. Yes. So you can see what's going on here. She has to don the floppy ears. And here's a longer quote where Brown Ben coins the term. Let me see how much of this I actually want to read. They talk about the tokar being a slaver's garment, and that's kind of interesting. It's neither here nor there, but basically the point is it's impossible to put on. It's this long thing. You got to wrap it around you. If it's too loose, it falls off. If it's too tight, it tangles, trips, and binds. And even wound properly, it requires you to hold it in one hand. And the whole point of it is that you can't do any work wearing a tokar. So it's a garment literally meant to enforce the idea that masters don't do work. You guys are familiar with that, but I just want to go over with it. And then this last paragraph, it says, Dany had wanted to ban the tokar when she took Meereen, but her advisors had convinced her otherwise. The mother of dragons must don the tokar or be forever hated, warned the Green Grace, Galaza Galere. Jeez, that's a lot of G's. That's a lot. Okay, in the wolves of Westeros, or a gown of Moorish lace, your radiance shall forever remain a stranger amongst us, a grotesque outlander, a barbarian conqueror. A barbarian conqueror. Meereen's queen must be a lady of old geese. Brown Ben Plum, the captain of the Second Sons, had put it more succinctly. Man wants to be king of the rabbits. He best wear a pair of floppy ears. So this is all about adapting. And essentially, she wants to get rid of the tokar. You can see why. It's literally designed to enforce the social order of slavery. But if she does that, she risks alienating the people of Meereen. So this is kind of what she's dealing with the whole book, isn't it, Ali? She's just caught in between.
Yeah, she has to be someone she's not in order to try and make everyone happy except herself. And the thing with the tokar, what you said is you hold it up, and the point of wearing it is that you don't do work when you wear it because you only have one hand. And maybe that's a luxury for the people of Old Geese and Meereen, but for Daenerys, it's just another form of chains.
Very true. Very true. And that's going to tie well into the Cinderella theme that we're about to introduce. And let me just see how much of this I need to read before we can get to that. Oh, yes. Okay. So along the lines of a queen belonging to her people, we see that Dany believes that ruling should not be easy. And so this is all coming from her first chapter. She's putting on the floppy ears. She goes and holds court. And go ahead and read this quote where it says Eerie fetched.
Eerie fetched her crown, wrought in the shape of the three-headed dragon of her house. Its coils were gold, its wings silver, its three heads ivory, onyx, and jade. Dany's neck and shoulders would be stiff and sore from the weight of it before the day was done. A crown should not sit easy on the head. One of her royal forebears had said that once. Some Aegon, but which one?
Right, yeah, which there are so many Aegons, it is hard to keep them straight. But you can see the point here. A crown should not sit easy on the head. Very much in line with Dany's ruling philosophy. It's the lesson of the Iron Throne. You know, the ruler shouldn't sit comfortably on the throne. So we see this idea enforced in multiple ways. And later that day, it actually says, by midday, Dany was feeling the weight of the crown upon her head and the hardness of the bench beneath her. But with so many still waiting on her pleasure, she did not stop to eat. Instead, she dispatched Jiqui to the kitchens for a platter of flatbread, olives, figs, and cheese. So small thing, but I just like how she's dedicated to her job. Like if you've ever had a work project that's super, you know, on the deadline crunch, you might forget to eat until like 4 PM or something. And then you're like, somebody go order pizza. And you just keep working. Like you get that vibe here with Dany. Like she's totally throwing herself into the task. She frequently doesn't sleep very well, doesn't eat, kind of just puts all her needs second, except for a little bit of Dario on the side. But we'll get to that. So let's talk about this Cinderella myth, Ollie. This is a cool find that you brought to me. So just go ahead and dive into it here.
Okay. So basically my idea is I noticed this because later in one of the chapters when Daenerys dives into the pit, she loses a sandal. And I thought that was really weird, also because one of Cinderella's original names was Ashtonpoodle, or the Little Cinder Girl, or the Little Ash Girl. And we all know that Daenerys was reborn from the ashes. She's the unburnt. So I dove deeper. And basically, my thought is that Cinderella in the classic Grimm's Tale, she flees the royal ball 3 times because she's forced to wear a pretty gown and be someone she's not. And she's a slave in her own home. And she leaves the ball 3 times. So my thought is she left politics when she married Drogo. She leaves politics at the end of this book, and my theory is she will leave the Iron Throne later on, and the politics that come with being the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms to go up north and fight with Jon Snow.
Yeah, okay, so a couple things there. The Cinderella name, it's right in there, Cinder, you know, like just what you think, like in Ashes and Cinders. And so Cinderella got that name, you said, because she likes to sleep by the fire. Is that correct?
Yes. So she sleeps by the fire to keep warm. And so as a result, she often wakes up with ashes all over her face. And that's how she got the name Cinderella. And it's just like when Dany emerges from the flames after birthing her dragons, completely covered in ash, like her hair is singed off.
Yeah, but I've actually got that quote right here. So it says, when the fire died at last and the ground became cool enough to walk upon, Sir Jorah Mormont found her amidst the ashes, surrounded by blackened logs and bits of glowing ember and the burnt bones of man and woman and stallion. She was naked, covered with soot, her clothes turned to ash, her beautiful hair all crisped away, yet she was unhurt. So twice, you know, it's emphasized she's sitting in the ashes, she's covered with ash and soot, she's sitting next to the embers of the fire. So that's a pretty strong likeness. And of course, that's the important transformational moment.
Yes.
When she gains this unburnt identity, like you're saying.
Yes. That's when she kind of comes into her own. And it's also similar things happen earlier on too, just when she's sleeping and she like holds the eggs because it makes her feel stronger after she loses baby Rhaego. Not exactly the same, but I think it translates similarly.
Yep. And so the slipper thing is really interesting. It's obviously one of the hallmarks. As I did a little bit of background research on the Cinderella myth, the slipper is one of the identifying marks. It's not always glass, but that leaving a slipper behind and then having some sort of king or monarch find the slipper and going around trying to find the woman who it belongs to. That's one of the defining elements of the Cinderella monomyth, which is, by the way, there's like over 2,000 versions of it in Europe. I was reading and not just confined to Europe. It's over 2,000 years old. It stretches all across the world. You know, types of similar type myths. So
I believe the original one is from Egypt, from 7 BC.
Read your notes here on that.
In the original story from Egypt, a girl is taking a bath when an eagle swoops down and steals one of her golden sandals. The eagle takes it to a nearby warlord, who then is mesmerized by the slipper and is determined to wed the owner. He finds the girl and makes her his bride, and that's from Rodolphus Strabo, the geography from 7 BC to AD. He was a traveler. I don't know a whole lot about him, but it reminds me. Yeah, but it reminds me of the first chapter in A Game of Thrones, in which Daenerys takes a very hot bath, and then immediately after weds Khal Drogo.
So one of the most interesting things is this in the older version of the Cinderella myth, it's not a fairy godmother, but some sort of a wishing tree. So
Yes.
talk about that for a second, because the people that know the Nissa Nissa Weirwood mythology ideas that I have are really going to flip their wigs when you hear this.
Yeah, so there is no fairy godmother in the original Cinderella. In the classic Grimm's fairy tale, Cinderella asks her father to bring her home the first branch that touches his head while he's away. So he brings it back to her and she plants it. And her mother's dead. Her father dies. So she plants it over her mother's grave and she cries on it so much that it blooms into a big tree. I believe it's a hazel tree. It varies from version to version. So when she can't go to the ball, but she wants to, she cries in front of the tree and is gifted the gown and slippers that allow her to go to the ball. And this tree that she buries over her mother's grave, obviously she has a very emotional connection to it, and I think it's similar to Daenerys and the lemon tree in her backyard, how she equates that with safety in childhood, but also with your theory about the weirwoods and the Night's Queen.
Yeah, both of those things are there. The lemon tree is like second only to the red door as far as like symbols of Dany's lost childhood and the safety, security, all those things that a fairy godmother or an ancestor tree would represent. And then you've got, let's see here. Was thinking of, okay, so in A Clash of Kings, Arya is with the Night's Watch, and there is a woman with a child that is like sort of tagging along with them, but the woman is injured and dies. And if you remember, she's buried under a tree, and Arya hears the willow tree saying, "Please, please," in the voice of the woman. And so that was one place where I felt like George was riffing on the whole ancestor tree idea. There's a couple different places. They bury a Night's Watchman also in that same sequence of events, and they throw seeds on his grave so that a tree can grow up from his grave. And obviously all of the Weirwood ideas, even without my Nissa Nissa stuff, the Weirwood ideas, it's very classic ancestor tree stuff. So this is kind of a good, when George finds these sort of mythical themes that he's already working with, it makes it easier for him to rope in the myth. So he says, okay, I'm doing stuff with ancestor trees with the Weirwoods and potentially Nissa Nissa. Dany's a Nissa Nissa character. And then the Cinderella myth happens to be about a girl that sleeps by the fire. So you can see how like this makes for a readily adaptable myth to rope into his own sort of a Song of Ice and Fire mythos. And the ancestor tree thing is really cool. I love that.
Yeah. Bal the Bard has a question. Can I answer it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
She says, do you think Meereen Mazdur could be a kind of perverted fairy godmother? She's an older witchy woman who comes to grant Dany's wish, but not in a good way. Yeah, actually, I think that works almost perfectly because she grants Dany's wish, but in a very messed up way. But still, in the end, even though Meereen Mazdur had bad intentions and was burned, Daenerys still ended up getting 3 dragons out of the whole debacle. So I think that works great. And I kind of want to focus a little more on Meereen Mazdur in the future.
Cool, yeah. And I was reading about the stepmother trope. It comes from the fact that so many women would die in childbirth. And so it was very frequent for men to remarry. And then you have this setup where, the children of the new wife are at odds with the other children. And so that kind of theme works well. We see that in Westeros a little bit. It's a medieval society. We see Catelyn worrying about Jon and stuff like that. So in any case, it's an interesting story, but what's interesting is that how much of, and I was just talking with Bal the Bard about this the other day, is that when George adapts fairy tales, which frequently have women in very minimized roles without a lot of agency, he tends to pump up the agency when he inverts things. Okay. Like, so for example, if you remember from the Sansa episodes in, I can't even remember the name of the damn series now, Signs and Portals, we talked about how there's this myth of Idun and the apples, and how she's abducted by a castle. Or I might be mixing two different myths now. So what was the one where she was? There's a myth where there's like an eagle that I think that is Idun. In any case, in the original myth, the Sansa Peril has to be rescued. But in the Song of Ice and Fire version, we see that Sansa is foreshadowed to cut the head off the giant, whereas in the myth, she has to be rescued from the giant. So frequently, the changes that George makes pump up the agency, and I think that's similar here with Cinderella, because as you were saying, the older version of the myth has a lot more agency than the sort of Disney version of Cinderella.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Sansa. You did a stream with Quinn where he talked about Cersei and the evil queen from Snow White. And now I can't stop thinking about Sansa being Snow White and Cersei being her version of the evil queen. So that's my next project, but I can't stop thinking about it. But George really like takes these classic fairy tales and he uses those tropes in a very interesting and clever way that I think says a lot about not only his story, but the myths themselves.
I think so too. Yeah, he's encouraging us. It's very like the way that he depicts history and the sort of patriarchal lens that it gets retold through. Like when we read Fire and Blood, we can see the maester bias, but underneath we can see these powerful female figures who are probably doing more than they're being credited for over and over again. Alysanne, Visenya, other characters like that. And I think he does the same thing with the myths, where the myth version that we get has this minimized role for a woman, but when we see the myths actually paralleled and translated into action, it's a lot more exciting. And Dany fits that perfectly. Obviously, Dany isn't looking. So in the Cinderella myth, many versions of it, Cinderella essentially is trying to gain acceptance in a higher class of society, which she does by marrying up. With Dany, it's the opposite. Marrying Hisdar is actually more like the pretend, putting on the floppy ears. It's not really who she is. And it's actually rejecting that, walking away from that. That is like kind of like Cinderella losing the gown and losing all the specialness and having to be accepted for who she really is, right?
Yeah, it's not until that she becomes who she really is and the prince sees her as she is that they actually get married. And with her marriage to Hisdar, when she's in Meereen, she's specifically given, it's a long scene of her being given a pair of slippers from Cleon, I believe the Butcher King, yes. And they're too small. And I think that's symbolic of she doesn't fit this slipper. This country that she's trying to be queen of and she's trying to make herself a part of for the greater good isn't working. So I think that slipper is like the glass slipper, but on someone who it doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple different significant slippers she has. She has the silver ones. She's got the ones from Cleon. And I don't know which one she's wearing in Daznak's pit, but she loses one slipper there, like you said, when she jumps over the wall to get to Drogon. And we were talking about Sansa. Sansa also loses one slipper when she's fighting with Lysa and almost getting pushed out the moon door. One of her slippers falls out the moon door. So I mentioned we have to go back and look at that. But like we've encountered many times, like George never confines himself. Like if he's using Cinderella themes, it's more logical that he'll use it on multiple characters and not just Dany. So
yeah,
maybe go take a look at Sansa and see what you find there.
Oh, I will. I'm very excited.
Yeah, the missing shoe is a symbol that we've caught in a few places and never known what to make of it. And it never occurred to me to think about Cinderella. So that's one of the reasons why I like this find so much. But
thank you.
So we're going to go, like I said, we're going to continue. We're going to get into the main narrative of the story. And now that we've outlined some of these sort of plot arc elements and as well as the Cinderella myth, we can sort of reference things that apply to those as we go. So let me go ahead and move my window in position here. And Alyssa, just so you know, everyone is enjoying this a lot. A lot of nice comments in the chat so far.
Yeah, I keep trying to look up and catch them all.
It is a learned skill. It is a learned skill to manage both the chat and the notes.
Yeah, when I become big like you, I'm going to need to get 2 computer screens.
Yeah, I actually prefer one big screen. Well, no, I take that back. I do have the high-low thing going on. So yeah.
Yeah.
That is convenient. All right. So thank you guys in the chat for your nice input. And one does wonder about Jon Snow and Snow White, if there's something going on. George does like to do a lot of gender swapping, so I haven't thought about that at all. But
I haven't thought about that either. Yeah, because he dies and he's supposedly going to be brought back to life, but never.
Yeah, he's gonna have to be kicked back to life by R'hllor, man.
Yeah, actually. Who said that?
I'm sorry, it was back a couple minutes and I just remembered. But if whoever said that can take credit. And...
Yeah, whoever said that, show yourself. Because that's a thanks. Now I have more to think about. So cool.
Did I say Lord's Kiss again? Kiss of life, right? I didn't say Lord's Kiss.
You said R'hllor's kiss.
Oh, R'hllor's kiss. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you don't want a Lord's kiss from R'hllor. That's probably bad. I always go for these jokes when they're there.
Yeah, but you know how much Jon loves a Lord's kiss.
He's good at that. So Asher's trueborn son, it was. Richard the Wit. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
The Lord's kiss awoke Snow White. Yes, exactly. That's my point. She's sleeping. She can't consent. Well, I mean, it's in the myth. I mean,
yeah, you can find a version of that on the internet somewhere.
Yeah, fairy tales aren't always consensual, by the way.
No, they're not, and that's part of the thing about women's rights that George has been playing with too.
Well, it looks like my people are inviting you back, Alisa, already. So this is good.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'd love to come back because, as you can tell, I have a lot to say.
Yeah, I'm presenting this without comment, Alicia. Thank you.
Oh my God.
I'll just leave that alone. And so, grappling with power and violence. That is going to be a major. I started making the sections by themes, and I was like, all right, let's make the section about her grappling with power and violence. And that turned out to be basically the entire narrative. So
it's the whole book.
It is the whole book. That is what she's dealing with. So here's an interesting place to start, okay? Dany regards herself as a quote-unquote calamity for good, which is very close to the idea of a cleansing fire that we've mentioned many times in regards to Dany. And we hear about this when the Green Grace explains to Dany a little bit about the history of Meereen.
All right. For centuries, Meereen and her sister cities, Yunkai and Astapor, had been the, I don't know what that word is, linchpins?
Linchpins.
Of the slave trade, the place where Dothraki Khals and the cousins of the Basilisk Isles sold their captives and the rest of the world came to buy. Without slaves, Meereen had little to offer to traders. Copper was plentiful in the Gascari Hills, but the metal was not as valuable as it had been when bronze ruled the world. The cedars that had once grown tall along the coast grew no more, felled by the axes of the old empire or consumed by dragonfire when geese made their war against Valyria. Once the trees had gone, the soil baked beneath the hot sun and blew away in thick red clouds. Sounds like Mirri Mazdar's prophecy, I'm just saying. It was these calamities that transformed my people into slavers. Galaza Galar had told her at the Temple of the Graces, and I am the calamity that will change these slavers back into people. Dany had sworn to herself.
So that's pretty, I like that one because it's just very embracing the idea that she is kind of a calamity. She is the fires of change, the cleansing fires, all that stuff. But you know, she's not just burning things for the sake of burning things or to be in power. She's literally trying to burn away the rot, you know, the old systems. So.
And Daenerys is criticized a lot for destabilizing an entire region and then just leaving and going to Westeros. But people, I think, forget that she's not just leaving. She is thinking about these things. She is thinking about the consequences of her actions, and she's trying. It's just that an entire portion of a continent is against her. Yeah,
I made a point about this later in the outline, but people are sometimes frustrated with Dany's dance chapters because they're, you know, she just stays there so long, and we want to get on with it, get to the point. You need to get to Westeros, fight the others, or do whatever. But it's like, take the time to get to know the character here. I know this is kind of a Song of Ice and Fire is kind of a fairy tale at times, but George really, really gets inside the head of these people and asks themselves, what would you feel like? What would you do? Dany liberated all these slaves. Then she led this train of refugees from Astapor to Meereen. She talks about seeing the trail of corpses behind her. In fact, Allie, you have that quote pulled.
Yeah, I do.
Pulled, I say, should I make fun of you for taking pictures of the pages instead of using a search of ice and fire?
Yeah, go ahead. So I didn't know that a search of ice and fire existed when I put this essay together. So there's just pictures of the pages from the book on here.
But it's got a delightfully OG feel. It's like, oh, the paperback. I haven't seen it in years, so it's kind of cool. But
thanks. That's what I'll tell my advisor when I turn this in as a thesis.
So, yeah, it's just breaks up the flow. Everyone's got ADD now, so you just it's more visual. It's more tactile.
I'm trying to find that quote.
Yeah.
Can you say we were talking about?
Which one were we looking for? I completely forgot. I made a joke.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to look at yours and see if it helps.
Okay.
People are against her character development.
Yeah, well, okay, so yeah, I think I've got it later in the thing. So we'll just keep going. We'll get
back. Okay, great.
So let's see here. So Dany, now one of the things about Dany that we always talk about is that she is making hard decisions. There are consequences for the decisions she makes. Other people have to pay the price for the decisions that she makes, and she takes the time to feel that. And so go ahead and read this bit here.
Your Grace, said Sir Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander of her Queen's Guard, there is no need for you to see this. He died for me.
And then read the next bit too. They will kill me if...
Okay. They will kill me too if I allow it. The lives that slew my stalwart shield were meant for me.
So you've got, again, it's over and over. People try to protect her. Like Dario tries to shield her from the crucified children on the way to Meereen. She insists on seeing them all.
Yeah,
the same here. But go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. With the next part.
Oh no, it seemed like you're about to say something.
Oh yeah, well, she just feels like this immense guilt over people dying for her, and I think she doesn't think she deserves people to die for her, but she's a symbol of hope for all these people, so of course they're going to sacrifice themselves to try and protect her, because in their eyes they gave her their new lives. And it's just amazing that she feels so humble, and this grief really hits her every time. Like, she doesn't feel the grief of one death more than the other. And she's very self-aware. And I think that's really important to her ruling style and to her values. She values her people above everything else. Yeah,
it's it really when you read Dany's chapters in isolation through this book, she's almost never happy. Like, she's having a very bad time. She is troubled by everything that happens. She's troubled by her inability to stop it. John Ice mentions that she can free slaves and execute bad people, but she struggles to figure out how to actually help the poor people. And it's probably because she's 15 and just doesn't know how to create a new economy. And that's the kind of thing where I think Tyrion will definitely help when he gets there, as far as trying to establish some more permanent new institutions, cultural ways of doing things, so that Dany can eventually leave. Because when I was finished reading this book, Allie, I was more convinced than ever that Dany will not leave Meereen until there is a solution. She won't. Yeah. No, she won't. She's like dying of thirst and dehydration, trying to get back to this city that wants nothing to do with her. So yeah, she's not leaving until those people are safe. Totally agree. And thank you, D. Villano, who is enjoying your analysis and shouting out your English degree. Yeah, English majors, what up? Woo! All right. And here we go. So then Dany is essentially in a position. Okay, so here's an interesting little thing, but there are Dothraki beliefs about not touching the dead. Dany does not care about those. It says, shrugging off the lion pelt, she knelt beside the corpse and closed the dead man's eyes, ignoring Jiki's gasp. Stalwart shield shall not be forgotten. Have him washed and dressed for battle, and bury him with cap and shield and spears. and we'll see this later when she goes out amongst the plague victims too. But she's very much a lead from the front. She doesn't ask people to take risks that she doesn't take, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Did you want to add something?
I'm just gonna say she's not gonna be calamity for good.
Yeah.
I might cry. Hope that's okay.
Thank you, Malachi.
Yes, thank you. I don't remember what I was gonna say now.
Oh, that was a nice one. We were talking about how she goes out amongst the plague victims and honors the corpse here, honors the dead.
Yeah, she honors the dead, guys. That's important. And I think she's not like Tywin, who's gonna like lead from the back. Like Tywin will win for sure, but Daenerys doesn't want to win if it means too many people are sacrificed for her own sake.
Yeah, and she says as much in a couple different ways in this book. And Ball the Bard points out that Dany is doing almost like a psychopomp thing or a priestess when she is sort of honoring the dead, giving them peace to allow them to move on. That's a good observation because she does have the sort of mother goddess Kali symbolism. I do see her as a priestess and a sorceress many times in many scenes. So yeah, that's a nice observation. Thank you, Ball the Bard. So here in Meereen, Dany is in a position of power and she's got to decide what laws to uphold and how. She's trying to bring justice to Slaver's Bay, but that requires upsetting the social order. And let me see if I want to read this whole quote. Yeah, go ahead and read it.
The whole thing?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. She had not forgotten the slave children the great masters had nailed up along the road from Yunkai. They had numbered 163, a child every mile, nailed to mileposts with one arm outstretched to point her way. After Meereen had fallen, Dany had nailed up like a Dany had nailed up like a number of the great masters. Swarms of flies had attended their slow dying, and stench had lingered long in the plaza. Yet some days she feared that she had not gone far enough. These Meereenese were a sly and stubborn people who resisted her at every turn. They had freed their slaves, yes, only to hire them back as servants at wages so meager that the most could scarce afford to eat. Those too old or young to be of use had been cast into the streets, along with the infirm and the crippled. And still the great masters gathered atop their lofty pyramids to complain of how the Dragon Queen had filled their noble city with hordes of unwashed beggars, thieves, and whores. To rule Meereen, I must win the Meereenese, however much I may despise them. I am ready, she told Irri.
Oh gosh, I was talking muted that whole time.
Oh, okay. I was like, what am I? Is something wrong with me? I can't hear anything.
I was on a roll too. It was just brilliant. Thanks. Anyways, yeah, there it is. All right. So what I was saying is that, so we're talking about the crucifixion of the slavers here, right? And when she did it in a storm of swords, and I'm glad you guys are getting a good laugh. She questioned it when she did it in a storm of swords. It says the anger was fierce and hot inside her when she gave the command. It made her feel like an avenging dragon. But later, when she passed by the men dying on the posts, when she heard their moans and smelled their bowels and blood, and then it trails off with an ellipsis. So she's essentially, it's capital punishment. It's very over the top, violent capital punishment. But these are the horrible slavers, right? So none of us had a huge problem with that. But Dany herself questions it. But then here she is in Dance, wondering if maybe she didn't go far enough because she didn't remove all of the slave masters from power. And whether or not she crucified them or not, you can certainly make the argument that she should have, removed them all from power, and she did not. So this just gives you, like, George doesn't give us or Dany any easy answers in Dance. It's not easily sorted out, and there's no pat answers to most of this. It's like two tough choices that she has. And so I don't even know what we're supposed to. I don't know if there is an answer that we're supposed to conclude. Oh, she should have done this. She should have done that. Like George is creating a situation where you can be of the opinion that she never should have conquered. She just should have moved on. You know, if she was going to stay, she should have done it differently. She should have, maybe taken more suggestions from the Meereenese or less. She should have removed the slavers. She shouldn't have. It's hard to say. It's a big mess.
Well, she can't take more of the Meereenese advice because she's doing literally everything they tell her to do. And I think no matter what she had done, there would have been a negative consequence to it. And that's the thing is all of these characters they don't know what's right or wrong. They're just trying to do the best they can. And no matter what, that has consequences.
An interesting point from Joe Snow could be an analog here for Azor Ahai not being able to remove all the White Walkers the first time, since we've drawn analogies between the slavers and the White Walkers. And Azor Ahai, whether it was him, whoever the last hero was, whoever it was fighting the White Walkers, clearly they didn't root them out completely. So that might be a theme that we have, as far as like going back to finish the job kind of a thing. Yes.
Yeah. So maybe Dany will also have to finish the job and rip them out root and stem and to do the same thing to the White Walkers.
It could be. And I think that, I'll go ahead and promo my 23 most anticipated plot points of the Winds of Winter series with Quinn from Quinn's Ideas, which will be coming in March. We filmed a whole bunch of that last week. Quinn came up and stayed at my house, and we did a lot of filming. One of those we did was Volantis 2.0, or Harrenhal 2.0, which is going to be Volantis, meaning that Dany is going to probably roast the inner city of Volantis where those black walls are. All the old blood of Volantis is conveniently sequestered there. They are the richest slave lords in existence in Essos. So ultimately, I think that Dany's Kill the Slave Masters arc will end in Volantis. To your point, Ali, it could be that it's a 1-2 move. Like she comes back to Meereen. Tyrion is already possibly in the process of being more ruthless, and they find a way to root out the slave masters more permanently, set something up, and then go by Volantis and trigger the rebellion that's waiting to pop off there. So I think that kind of makes sense. We could see them get rooted out and have them finish the job. Hopefully it won't be too dark. We'll talk about Dario's ideas for that in a little bit, but
yeah, I'm actually concerned if she completely destroys Volantis. Isn't that where all of her worshippers are?
Well, so Volantis is set up a specific way, right? There's the wider city, and there's the east and the west side, the poor and the richer half. And on the richer half is this thing called the inner city, which is an armored citadel within the city. It's got huge black walls of fused stone. They're so wide that they hold chariot races on the top of the walls. Only the old blood, meaning people descended from Valyria, are even allowed inside the old city.
Got it.
So it's very much like the worst of the worst, all gathered in one place. And so the only thing you'd need to make it a very morally okay city burning is to basically get all of their servants out of the inner city. But that's easy because we have the Widow of the Waterfront and the Raloris who are on Dany's side and have their fingers embedded into the slave population. So it's going to be, it's going to be Harrenhal 2.0. I think the entire inner city will get roasted.
All right, thank you. Hashtag the Targaryens caused the doom.
Hashtag the Targaryens caused the doom. So, and look for that. By the way, that series will be on both my channel and Quinn's Ideas. And as a fan of the real world, I have to accept this. I'm not sure if it's a compliment, but I'll take it. I do eat cereal with a spoon and not my fingers, though, if you remember Puck. Anyways. So, Dany's wondering if she went far enough. She's sticking around and trying to do the right thing, even though many of us probably would have grown frustrated and left for Westeros at some point during her story. So the contrasting advice that she gets from Resnack and the Shave Pate sort of exemplify the bind that she's in.
Okay. Your Grace has not asked for my counsel, the Shave Pate, but I say that blood must pay for blood. Take one man from each of the families I have named and kill him. The next time one of yours is slain, take two from each great house and kill them both. There will not be a third murder. Resnick squealed in distress. No, gentle queen, such savagery would bring down the ear of the gods. We will find the murderers, I promise you, and when we do, they will prove to be baseborn filth, you shall see.
So you can see the biases there. Resnack is biased towards the upper class, and so he says, oh, these murderers must be baseborn filth. Whereas Skahaz is like, yeah, it's the pyramids. You need to go, take people from the pyramids and kill them. So very opposite pieces of advice. And it's possible that Resnack's methods would work, but it would require Dany to compromise her moral standards. And that's exactly the sort of temptation that we're watching out for with Dany. Will her basic goodness and empathy become subservient to utilitarianism when the pressure is on? For the most part, the answer is no. And she refuses, obviously, Skahaz's advice here and in other places. So when she holds court, this dichotomy of former slaves and former masters is in evidence.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, right there.
The hall had filled, and Unsullied stood with their backs to the pillars, holding shields and spears, the spikes on their caps jutting upward like a row of knives. The Meereenese had gathered beneath the eastern windows. Her freedmen stood well apart from their former masters. Until they stand together, Meereen will know no peace. Arise, Dany settled onto her bench. The hall rose. At least they do as one.
That at least they do as
That
one.
at least
So
they do as one.
You can see how Dany's sitting there just kind of almost rolling her eyes. Is like, well, at least they stand up at the same time. Like, that's what I have to work with so far.
I'm surprised they do.
But the key is that she's trying to get buy-in here. She understands that she needs the people of Meereen to buy into the new social order that she's trying to get. And so what she's trying to do is to prevent what happened in Astapor from happening here. And I'll just read this real quick. It said, Cleon, the self-styled great, was no better. However, the Butcher King had restored slavery to Astapor. The only change being that the former slaves were now the masters. And the former masters were now the slaves. And this is what happens if people lose sight of right and wrong and just seek retribution. We'll still have slavery, but the players just trade sides. And after a generation or two, that won't even matter anymore. So Dany knows she has to get the Meereenese people to buy in. And that's why she can't just be a dictator or even merely a liberator. She's got to foster this buy-in if she can. And she does that in part by trying to sort out all the various issues that arise in the sack of Meereen in the wake of the battle. She has to sort out slaves and masters with their grievances against one another, which she does to the best of her ability, but often she ends up pleasing no one. And she thinks, for example, that the Harpy has another son when she's unable to grant the request of a former slave who was wronged and wanted retribution. Now, one thing I do like is that she comes up with a really nice solution for the issue of the guilds and the tradesmen. So go ahead and read this quote. It's a little longer, but it's good.
Okay. I'll try to say all the words this time.
You're doing great, by the way. You're doing great.
Thank you. Oh, also, Joe Snow said, I want a little Mo Resnick, and I laughed.
Mo Resnick, Mo problems.
Yeah. Mo Pattis, Mo problems. The stonemasons were wroth with her, it seemed. The bricklayers as well. Certain former slaves were carving stone and laying bricks, stealing work from guild journeymen and masters alike. The freedmen work too cheaply, Magnificence, Resnick said. Some call themselves journeymen, or even masters, titles that belong by rights only to the craftsmen of the guilds. The masons and bricklayers do respectfully petition your worship to uphold their ancient rights and customs. The freedmen work cheaply because they are hungry, Dany pointed out. If I forbid them to carve stone or lay bricks, the chandlers, the weavers, the goldsmiths will soon be at my gates asking that they be executed from those trades as well. She considered a moment. Let it be written that henceforth only guild members shall be permitted to name themselves journeymen or masters, provided the guilds open their rolls to any freedman who can demonstrate the requisite skills.
This time, I'm muting myself. I decided I wasn't gold enough, so I increased my level of gold. So let's see here. Yes. So this is pretty clever, right? I like it because she basically just pulls the solution out of her pocket. She's like, oh, what's the problem? Let's see. And then she comes up with a very reasonable solution that allows the poorest, workers who are untrained to A, get paid for the level of labor they can provide, and B, apply for the higher status of journeymen and tradesmen if they can. And so I just think it's a brilliant solution. It's also fair to the guild members and preserves their ability to have a higher level of income for their acquired skills. And so this is the kind of solution that will foster bridge building between the former, wealthy and the former downtrodden, because sooner or later you're going to have some of these, ex-slaves and stuff applying for these trades, doing well, making friends with the other stonemasons. They have dinner together now. They have picnics together. Like, they start to mingle. Hey, you're not so bad. You're not so bad either. So these are the kind of things that, given time, will start to knit a new society together. But it does take a lot of time. And this is the kind of thing hopefully we'll see more of when Tyrion gets there.
Yeah, hopefully. And it seems like time is something that everyone in Planetos is running out of. So that is kind of a problem.
Well, I do think the long night we'll have a little more time for the end of the series than we did on the show. We'll get a long night that's more than one night, but we'll see. So we won't go through all the little squabbles that she has to settle, but like I said, that one was very clever. So I wanted to read that one. Now, a huge issue for Dany to settle is that of the fighting pits, right? She's against them for obvious reasons. It's blood sport. It's often a case of the people fighting in the pits not having the choice. They're being forced to do so. They throw all kinds of prisoners, and they throw dwarves and elderly and even children in there and do all kinds of horrible things. Tyrion and Penny almost got fed to lions. The thing is that not all of the pit fighters were, compelled. Some of them liked to do it. And so Dany finally starts to give ground on this pit fighting thing when Hisdar, instead of arguing himself, he brings 7 of the pit fighters with him to make the case to Dany. And I think this is really interesting as far as what it shows about Dany's decision-making process and all that stuff. So go ahead and read this one.
Dany knew his 7 by name, if not by sight. All had been amongst the most famed of Meereen's fighting slaves, and it had been the fighting slaves, freed from their shackles by her sewer rats, who led the uprising that won the city for her. She owed them a blood debt. I will hear you, she allowed. One by one, each of them asked her to let the fighting pits reopen. Why, she demanded, when Aethok had finished. You are no longer slaves, doomed to die at master's whim. I freed you. Why should you wish to end your lives upon the scarlet sands? I trained since 3, said Gohor the giant. I kill since 6. Mother of Dragons says I am free. Why not free to fight? If it is fighting you want, fight for me. Swear your sword to the mother's men, or the free brothers, or the stalwart shields. Teach my other freedmen how to fight. Gohor shook his head. Before I fight for master, you say fight for you. I say fight for me. The huge man thumped his chest with a fist as big as a ham. For gold, for glory.
So this one is, pretty good argument. Dany doesn't really have much to say to it. She ends by saying, okay, I'll consider that. And eventually it's the same argument presented again that wins her over. And it's kind of one of those things where she shrugs her shoulders and says, if this is truly what my people wish, do I have the right to deny it to them? It was their city before it was mine, and it is their own lives they wish to squander. So, this is cool because Dany's respecting other people's views, even though they clash with her own moral standards. She's not, a psychopath and an authoritarian and all that. She listens to arguments and she respects other people's wishes. So that was cool.
Weird how she's not someone who will kill someone just because they disagree with her.
Totally. And of course, Dany does insist on many restrictions. Nobody can be compelled. No children. The fighters are getting half the money. So they're doing really well out of this. And of course, Hisdar's doing well too. But, so all in all, she gets the certain assurances and ends up regretting it anyways. But we'll get to that. So, so in the end, she consents to reopening them. Criminals can't be forced to fight unless they're rapists, murderers, or slavers. Everybody else can't be. Lesser crimes. So moving along, she hears about the various crimes committed during the sack and before, and this is while she's holding court. And Dany reflects on the violence that was needed to topple the slave masters from power, and she says, I'm a queen over a city built on dust and death. And there's more lines like this. She's very hard on herself. She's her own worst critic. and she never really blinds herself to the violence that has been involved in her decision-making process, as I was saying earlier. So she feels mostly justified in doing what she did, but even still, she doesn't blind herself to the bloodshed involved. And that is just the kind of heavy conscience that you want from someone making decisions of war, and especially if that someone has dragons. And yes, it is 420 somewhere. I think it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, though. So like on the Azores, I guess you can like smoke them if you got them. But yeah, basically 20 minutes after the hour now. We've ruined the 4 part, but praise Garth, yes. So this climaxes at the end of the first chapter when she's presented with the bones of Hosea, the shepherd's child that Drogon seemingly ate. This has a profound effect on Dany, and the memory of Hosea serves as a focal point for Dany's reservations on the use of dragons and violence all through the book. So in Dany 2, when Dany goes to visit Viserion and Rhaegal in the pit, where she chained them after she heard about Hosea, Dany thinks about Hosea and the nature of dragons.
What sort of mother lets her children rot in darkness? If I look back, I am doomed, Dany told herself. But how could she not look back? I should have seen it coming. Was I so blind, or did I close my eyes willfully so I would not have to see the price of power?
So I guess I would say, like, to whatever extent that she was reveling in the glory of birthing of dragons and perhaps blinding herself to the violence they can cause, she's not doing it any longer. And she really wasn't ever at all. But certainly at this point, she's checking herself. She's going, whoa, what have I unleashed upon the world? And we'll read that quote later too. So there's a lot of thoughts, like I said, that are along these same lines. So here's one about, yes, so go ahead and read this next bit.
Okay. Viserys had told her all the tales when she was little. He loved to talk of dragons. She knew how Harrenhal had fallen. She knew about the Field of Fire and the Dance of Dragons. One of her forebears, the third Aegon, had seen his own mother devoured by his uncle's dragon, and there were songs beyond count of villages and kingdoms that lived in dread of dragons till some brave dragon slayer rescued them. At Astapor, the slavers' eyes had melted. On the road to Yunkai, when Dario tossed the heads of Salor the Bald and Prendel Nagaznin at her feet, her children made a feast of them. Dragons had no fear of men, and a dragon large enough to gorge on sheep could take a child just as easily. Her name had been Hosea. She was 4 years old.
And Dany is, again, staring into the pit with Rhaegal and Viserion, the Stygian darkness, as she is thinking all this to herself. So essentially, she's appreciating the full horror of the violence that dragons can unleash. And she goes on to think that although the shepherd could have been lying, he probably wasn't, because he waited for everyone to leave the court to show Dany the bones, which is not consistent with the motive of trying to make her look bad. Mm-hmm. So Dany responds to Hosea's death by locking up the dragons, as the chapter goes on to tell us. And the last passage gives us Dany musing on herself as the mother of monsters.
Mother of dragons, Daenerys thought. Mother of monsters. What have I unleashed upon this world? A queen I am, but my throne is made of burned bones, and it rests on quicksand. Without dragons, how could she hope to hold Meereen, much less win back Westeros? I am the blood of the dragon, she thought. If they are monsters, so am I.
And that's a well-known quote, and this really is the crux of the matter. Dany needs dragons to free the slaves, to rule Meereen, and to take back Westeros. But how does she use dragons in a way that is consistent with her moral values? Now, she's actually done pretty well with this up to this point. The problem right now is that she can't control the dragons when she's not actually leading them into war. Like, they did the right thing when she burned the slavers in Astapor. They didn't start burning the Unsullied or something. Like, they did what they were supposed to, or Drogon at least did. No, actually, all three of them were in the air. But she can't control the dragons just when they're chilling, and so she can see the potential for ultra-violence, Clockwork Orange style ultra-violence. Even though it was directed at the slaves in Astapor, which is good, she thinks of the horror of watching dragons burn people, the eyeballs melting. And this kind of self-reflection is the stuff that we don't see from characters who are actually psychopathic, like Cersei. Cersei's always the go-to comparison. But even Jaime, think about Jaime. He's begun to reflect on himself, but it's nowhere near as honest as what Dany's doing. Does Jaime ask himself if he's a monster, which he basically is? No, he doesn't. Dany's questioning of herself is very constant, and it is no holes barred. And that's what I'm taking out of this passage. Go ahead.
And she doesn't try to justify any of her actions. Like Jaime does, he recognizes that he did bad things, but he thinks they're all justified because it was to protect his family. And while Daenerys' reasoning might be similar, she doesn't try and use that to justify it and make it okay. And by locking up her dragons and putting them in the darkness, she is doing the right thing as far as safety goes for her people, but it's making her even more, I don't want to say weak, but it's making her a weaker queen and less of herself because she's not allowing herself to be connected to them.
It's true. She, you can see that Zaro is less impressed with her when she doesn't have the dragons and sort of brings it up. Ben Brown Plum is one of my patrons. Brown Ben Plum is a character in Song of Ice and Fire, and he basically leaves Dany because she won't use the dragons. He asks her over and over. She says no, and then he leaves her because he wants to be on the winning side. Grolio also loses heart because she won't use the dragons. So it does make her weaker. You're absolutely right. Ball the Bard has chimed in with a super chat and a very good observation. A throne resting on burned bones is not a lot like the Forsaken. It's exactly like the Forsaken vision of Euron's throne of skulls. Is this potential Night Queen symbolism? Well, we are probably going to do a whole episode with sort of symbolic foreshadowing for Dany, following up after this one. And Allie's got a couple of cool foreshadowings that might have to do with Jon and the Long Night. I found a couple recently. I've got more in the past. And so, Ball, let's chat about this. That's interesting. There are a lot of foreshadowings of Euron and Dany coming together, at least for a time, and with Night King and Night Queen symbolism. And I totally agree, Ball. I think that is a good call.
I looked at that quote too, because I was going to include it in my notes, but the thing that threw me off was and resting on quicksand. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
I think Euron's not on stable ground, so we might not see the quicksand, but you know that still works. I think, yeah. Interesting symbolism though, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And like I said, when we do the symbolic foreshadowing episode, we'll come back and explore that, all the Euron Dany stuff and whatever else. So, okay, so ultimately the problem expressed here with Dany thinking about herself as the mother of monsters, needing dragons to rule, but not sure how to control them. It's going to be resolved when Dany decides that essentially she shouldn't use the dragons to conquer Westeros at all, but rather to face the others. The dragons, I think, are basically, the others are the only foe that basically merits the supernatural power of the dragons. It's a supernatural fix for a supernatural problem. Or you could simply look at others and dragons as these two magical beings on the extreme opposites of ice and fire that will cancel each other out in some way. So,
and I'm wondering if the dragons were at one point created to fight the others.
Certainly possible. And the opposite is also possible, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, somebody's asking about Quinn. Quinn's not on the stream today. He's probably sleeping, knowing his sleep schedule. Guy works all night. But we are doing 23 most anticipated plot lines of The Winds of Winter. 23 short videos, one a day. Quinn and I discussing each plot point, like 15 minutes at a time or so. And that'll be coming out all in March. So tons of stuff for that.
Very hyped.
Yeah. No, March Madness is going to have to live without my nimble dick rap this year. So, yeah. Burn bridges are burn bridges. They don't get the nimble rack, this nimble dick rap. They don't get none of that. Yeah. So, anyways, but it's out there on Twitter if anybody needs to find it.
There's a lot of good topics they have listed there, just so you guys can get excited.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I was talking about the Song of Ice and Fire Madness tournament. Do you know what that is? It's just a dumb Twitter thing. People vote on which character they like better, and it's set up like a March Madness bracket.
Oh.
And last year, Nimbledick almost won, but he didn't. And I did a Nimbledick squisher rap to try to cheer him on. And yeah,
that's like a sports thing, right?
It's a Song of Ice and Fire version of a sports thing. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah. Anyways, the best part, I did a Nimbledick rap. That's the only thing I care about. So what can I say?
Everyone vote for young Griff if he's on there.
My name is Fagon.
Yeah, everyone vote for Fagon.
So there's an instructive passage in Dany's second chapter where Dany hears Sir Barristan tell the story of leaving Joffrey's service in King's Landing, and it gets at the idea of culpability and moral gray area. It doesn't really fit into anything else that we're reading, but it's interesting. And Dany essentially is hearing Barristan imply that the Starks actually have some sort of honor, Ned in particular. And Dany responds,
Stark was a traitor who met a traitor's end. Your Grace, said Selmy, Eddard Stark played a part in your father's fall, but he bore you no ill will. When the eunuch Varys told us that you were with child, Robert wanted you killed, but Lord Stark spoke against it. Rather than countenance the murder of children, he told Robert to find himself another hand. Have you forgotten Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon? Never. That was Lannister work, Your Grace. Lannister or Stark, what's the difference? Viserys used to call them the usurper's dogs. If a child is set upon by a pack of hounds, does it matter which ones tear out his throat? All the dogs are just as ugly. The guilt, the word caught in her throat. Hosea, she thought, and suddenly she heard herself say, I have to see the pit, in a small voice as small as a child's whisper. Take me down, sir, if you would.
So there we have just Dany running into essentially, well, I would say what's happening here is that Dany's understanding of the world has become more nuanced and more complex with age and experience. Her older, more simplistic thought about painting everyone who opposed her father as dogs and murderers isn't holding up. And she's thinking about how things might be more complex. She's listening to Barristan and she's realizing that guilt is complex. She has guilt. She has blood on her hands. And so that leads her to thinking about Hosea and the chained up dragons. So this is an important step in the evolution of Dany's understanding of her history and her place in the world. Like we mentioned last time, her understanding of just how bad her father, the Mad King, was is kind of being slow played. She's only getting little clues about it. And I think a sort of a startling revelation about that is coming. And I think George was holding it off for a dramatic reason. But it's interesting to trace her understanding, like I said, just becoming more complex, more nuanced.
And I think that quote is the hint. We got the speech in the show, how Lannister, Targaryen, Stark, Tyrell, they're all just spokes on a wheel. I think we got that in the show. We haven't gotten that in the books, but I think it's that same idea that's being hinted here. Because while, yeah, the Starks and the Lannisters were her enemies, she's not exactly better because they're all spokes on the wheel.
Yep. And I see Pat Riley trickling in. I tried to hold the stream late for you, Pat. I gave you about 15 minutes. He messaged me and asked me to start late because he was coming late. But that's what I got for you. You're definitely going to want to rewind, Pat, and watch Alyssa's cool stuff about Cinderella that we did at the beginning of the stream because it was awesome.
Thank you. Also, Pat, you make some of the best comments. Thank you for that.
Oh, he's a comment all-star. Oh, he says he was here earlier. Okay, cool.
Oh, okay.
You must not have cursed enough. I didn't see you. Definitely the best avatar. The Shaq kissy face is just
that gif.
Wow, that's kind of intimate. Listen to us in the shower. My voice was serenading off of your shower tiles. That is really something. All right, so Dance with Dragon, Dany 2, starts with yet another Sons of the Harpy killing. And this time it's the killing of the 9 victims that we read about in the opening, the one that stabbed Dany through the heart, right? So the degree of the bad news essentially keeps getting worse as she hears the report unfold. First, she hears the number 9. Then she hears that one of the victims was Missandei's brother.
Massador, Dany made a fist. Missandei and her brothers had been taken from their home on Noth by raiders from the Basilisk Isles and sold into slavery in Assapor. Young as she was, Missandei had shown such a gift for tongues that the good masters had made a scribe of her. Massador and Marcelin had not been so fortunate. They had been gelded and made into unsullied.
And so this is very sad. It's Massador, right? And a stark contrast to the show. I was rewatching the show. Really awful scene where she executes Massador. I hated that scene. Didn't make any sense. There's really nothing equivalent to that in the books. But So here, Mosador dies. She's obviously, this is a big blow to her. And then it gets even worse. Dany asks if anyone was captured and hears that they only have the wine cellar at the wine shop where 2 of the 9 people were poisoned.
Your servants have arrested the owner of the wine shop and his daughters. They plead their ignorance and beg for mercy. They all plead ignorance and beg for mercy. Give them to the Shavepate Skahas. Keep each apart from the others and put them to the question. It will be done, your worship. Would you have me question them sweetly or sharply? Sweetly, to begin. Hear what tales they tell and what names they give you. It may be they had no part in this. She hesitated. 9. The noble Resnick said, who else?
So if you think about it, it's very unlikely that the wine merchant had no knowledge of the poisoning. But nonetheless, Dany does not at first command the harsh questioning, which is torture, basically. That's how we should read that. It's possible that the wine cellar may have been forced by the Harpy's sons. I think that's probably the most likely scenario, which leaves him somewhat innocent, is that they just show up, excuse me, and then say, here's what you're going to do or else we're going to kill you. But it's also quite likely that he may have gone along willingly. But it's almost impossible that he would have had no knowledge. Because you picture at a wine shop, like you sit down at the counter, they hand you the glass of wine, unless there was like a super slick Harpy's son, like tapping out the iocane powder in the drink, whatever, like when he wasn't looking, the wine cellar people are probably culpable. So I'm breaking all this down because, of course, this is leading up to Dany's probably darkest act in the whole story, which is the harsh questioning. So another thing we pointed out that we're talking about the wine merchant and his daughters. Probably they were not talking about children here. We're most likely talking about teens or young adults who helped him run the shop if they're being arrested along with him as suspects. However, it's not clear, and however old they are, it's clear that using torture is unacceptable to Dany at first. This is something that is beyond her moral standards when she first, thinks about the situation. But that changes after she hears about the very worst of this news. So go ahead and read this.
Okay. Very worst. I had scrolled down a little too far, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
3 freedmen murdered in their homes, the Shavepate said. A moneylender, a cobbler, and the harpist Rylona Rhee. They cut her fingers off before they killed her. The queen flinched. Rylona Rhee had played the harpist sweetly as the maiden. When she had been a slave in Yunkai, she had played for every highborn family in the city. In Meereen, she had become a leader amongst the Yunkish freedmen, their voice in Dany's councils. We have no captives but this wine cellar. None. This one grieves to confess. We beg your pardon. Mercy, thought Dany. They will have the dragon's mercy. Skahas, I have changed my mind. Question the man sharply. I could question the daughter sharply whilst the father looks on. That will wring some names from him. Do as you think best, but bring me names. Her fury was a fire in her belly. I will have no more unsullied slaughtered.
So there's no question that Dany is making a compromise of her own morality here. One sympathizes with the need to stop these killings, certainly. The Rylona Rhee murder was particularly cruel, and more importantly, it had a terrorizing effect on anyone trying to buy in to Dany's new social order. And that's exactly the kind of thing that she can't have. I mean, this really is terrorism targeted right at the core of what she's trying to do. Nevertheless, though, this is the kind of slippery slope stuff that we're looking out for with Dany. Her fury against those who killed her people is justified and is not comparable to the idea of burning innocent people by the hundreds with dragonfire, as the show depicted. However, she doesn't know for certain that the wine merchant and his daughters are culpable. So there is potential for Dany to have misdirected her fury here. So this is probably Dany's darkest moment, like I said, morally speaking, in the entire series. So I will leave it to you guys to add your comments, both in the chat and on the comments, people watching this later, feel free to leave a comment. This is not an act which is defensible. It's meant to be something we're supposed to look at and say, Dany's struggling with her decision-making here, and she's making a decision that kind of cuts against her standards. I don't think that is foreshadowing for Burning King's Landing, but we're here to look at this thing honestly. So, Alyssa, what do you think?
Well, I think, it's definitely probably her worst act. It's still not equivalent to being foreshadowing for her committing genocide, but I I think it's interesting that she's having the daughters questioned and whether they're children or they're grown. I think it's interesting to remember that they're women. So Daenerys isn't discriminating in how she punishes. Like in that scene where in season 5 where she executes Massador, it's not the same, but she's not discriminating in her punishment. She's not making it lighter just because they're women. And I know that's not necessarily a good thing that she's having these daughters tortured. It's not a good thing, but I think it's important when she looks at the gender here.
That's an interesting point. I did not think about that. But yeah, so she's, like I said, she's ordering the harsh questioning. And the main thing to keep in mind here is that, like, what has forced her to cross this line? The murder of her Unsullied, the murder of her freedmen. So this is still, if she's going too far, she's still going too far to protect her people. Like, this isn't just vengeance, like crucifying the slavers. She's trying to get names, and she's so desperate to make some sort of progress on this problem that she's now willing to cross this line. So anyways, that's all worth considering. Now, this is also where Dany demands 2 children as hostages from each pyramid, which she treats as pages and cupbearers in the Westerosi tradition. And she treats them well and becomes fond of them. And she refuses all calls from the Shave Pate to execute them, even as the violence continues. This is why it's hard for me to think that the wine seller's daughters were children. If Dany has such mercy on the children of the actual great masters, you know, she'd probably be unwilling to torture other children, I think. But in any case, here's a passage from Dany, the 4th chapter of Dance, or Dany's 4th chapter of Dance, regarding the hostages. Dany is talking to the Green Grace here about the latest murders by the sons of the Harpy. Well, let me see if we need to read all this. It's pretty long.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
Okay. 3, saying it left a bitter taste in her mouth. The cowards broke in on some weavers, freed women who had done no harm to anyone. All they did was make beautiful things. I have a tapestry they gave me hanging over my bed. The sons of the Harpy broke their loom and raped them before slitting their throats. This we have heard, and yet your radiance has found the courage to answer butchery with mercy. You have not harmed any of the noble children you hold as hostage. Not as yet, no. Dany had grown fond of her young charges. Some were shy, some were bold, some sweet, some sullen, but all were innocent. If I kill my cupbearers, who will pour my wine and serve my supper? She said, trying to make light of it. The priestess did not smile. The Shave Pate would feed them to your dragons, it is said. A life. For every brazen beast cut down, he would have a child die. Dany pushed her food about her plate. She dare not glance over where Grazar and Keza stood, for fear that she might cry. The Shave Pate has a harder heart than mine. They had fought about the hostages 6 times. The sons of the Harpy are laughing in their pyramids, Skahaz said. Just this morning. What good are hostages if you will not take their heads? In his eyes, she was only a weak woman. Hosea was enough. What good is peace if it must be purchased with the blood of little children? These murders are not their doing, Dany told the Green Grace feebly. I am no butcher queen.
So that Butcher Queen title is something that's going to come up again when we talk about Daario. But Daario and Skahaz are giving Dany a lot of the same kinds of advice here in the second half or the middle part of the book. And so in A Dance with Dragons 5, Skahaz produces a list of names of Meereenese with blood ties to some of those in the armies of her enemies. And it says, Skahaz drew a parchment scroll from his sleeve. Your worship should have a look at this. A list of all the Meereenese ships in the blockade with their captains, great masters all. So Dany studies the scroll. She sees the names of the ruling families of Meereen. She asks, what am I supposed to do? And he says, every man on that list has kin within the city, sons and brothers, wives and daughters, mothers and fathers. Let my brazen beasts seize them. Their lives will win you back those ships. If I send the brazen beasts into the pyramids, it will mean open war inside the city. I have to trust in Hisdar. I have to hope for peace. Dany held the parchment above a candle and watched the names go up in flame, while Skahaz glowered at her. Afterwards, Sir Barristan told her that her brother Rhaegar would have been proud of her. Dany remembered the words Ser Jorah had spoken at Astapor. Rhaegar fought valiantly. Rhaegar fought nobly. Rhaegar fought honorably. And Rhaegar died. So she's doing the right thing, but she's questioning herself. And that is like, again, there's no easy answers in this entire Marinese Slaver's Bay ball of wax. She is holding to her standards here, but she's wondering if she's going to get played. Almost like Ned Stark did in King's Landing. I was thinking it's sort of similar. Like Ned obviously has very admirable moral standards, but he kind of gets played in King's Landing. But unlike Ned, Dany is in power. Ned was not the king. Dany does have the power to enact change. And unlike Ned, she is more keenly aware of the danger and treachery around her, I would say. So,
it's also like, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's also kind of like a small, mild double standard. People say that Ned was stupid and should have just had the kids captured and the queen killed, and not get played, but he was too honorable. But here, Dany is being honorable, and people like hate her for the actions that she takes, that Ned refused to. So
right, she's going a little further. She does take these hostages and stuff, but she won't actually kill them. And so and you see this as it gets worse. Like she just refuses to do it. So it's to her credit. She's upholding her moral standards, but she realizes that that's not enough. So now later on, Daario gives Dany similar advice to that of Ska has, encouraging her to be a butcher queen. Why don't you take the Dany lines and I'll do the Daario lines here, since it's basically just a conversation.
I've been waiting for this. Awesome.
Okay. You are fighting shadows when you should be fighting the men who cast them, Daario went on. Kill them all and take their treasures, I say. Whisper the command, and your Daario will make a pile of their heads taller than this pyramid.
If I knew who they were.
Zach and Pal and Merrick, them and all the rest, the great masters. Who else would it be?
He is as bold as he is bloody. We have no proof this is their work. Would you have me slaughter my own subjects?
Your own subjects would gladly slaughter you. He had been away so long, Dany had almost forgotten what he was. Sellswords were treacherous by nature, she reminded herself.
Fickle, faithless, brutal, he will never be more than he is. He will never be the stuff of kings. The pyramids are strong, she explained to him. We could take them only at great cost. The moment we attack one, the others will rise against us.
Then winkle them out of their pyramids on some pretext. A wedding might serve. Why not? Promise your hand to Hisdar, and all the great masters will come to see you married. When they gather in the Temple of the Graces, turn us loose upon them.
Dany was appalled. He is a monster, a gallant monster, but a monster still. Do you take me for the Butcher King?
Better the butcher than the meat. All kings are butchers. Are queens so different?
This queen is.
So Dany actually dismisses Daario from her, not from her service, but right after he makes the suggestion, she's like, leave me. And then she tells Barristan to send the second sons out into the field to keep him away from her. And it's basically because she's afraid of what she could become with Daario. Go ahead and read this quote here.
Okay.
Starting with he would.
He would make a monster of me, she whispered, a butcher queen. But then she thought of Drogon far away and the dragons in the pit. There is blood on my hands too, and on my heart. We are not so different, Daario and I. We are both monsters.
And so essentially, she realizes there's a certain brutal logic in what he's saying. And her as a dragon lord, she could be this awful, terrifying butcher queen, the likes of which the world has never seen. And she is so terrified of that she literally sends Daario away when she had been waiting for him to get back. So someone was saying my mic needs to be turned up. I haven't. It should be fine. I mean, it's been the same this whole time. I can turn it up a little bit.
Is everything okay?
I think so.
Okay.
You dropped out for a hot second.
My computer lost connection for a second. Okay, great.
You're back. All right. And yes, Guilty Undertaker, I would see that as an intentional red wedding call out when he's like, winkle them out on some pretext, like a wedding, just slaughter them all at the wedding. It's very effective, I've heard. So, yeah. Definitely we're supposed to think of the red wedding there. And again, I would say that Dany is she's really being too hard on herself. But the point is that she sees the path that she could go down if she takes the advice of people like Daario and Ska has. The dragons possess the potential for immense violence, which we've seen her contemplating, and Dany is flat out scared of what she could become, which is a good thing. That is, again, the kind of conscience that you want, the kind of self-reflection that you want from somebody with dragon power. So later she reflects back on this encounter and it says,
"Get the heads of all the noble houses out of the pyramids on some pretext," Daario had said. "The dragon's words are fire and blood." Dany pushed the thought aside. It was not worthy of her.
So there you go. It's not worthy of her, meaning it doesn't live up to her values. And it really can't be any more clear than that to me. So,
yeah. Is this an okay time to bring up what we were talking about earlier about Daario and her fantasy about the marriage?
let's see. Which bit was that?
How here Daario is saying, get them all in one space and at a wedding, and then we'll kill them. And then later, when on her wedding day, she is not wanting everyone to be murdered, but she still wants Daario to be there and betray everyone and take her away. So like her fantasy, like her fairy tale fantasy, isn't the murder of people, but it is freedom, and it is getting away from these politics.
Yeah, well, so let's get back to the whole Cinderella theme. We talked about the floppy ears. We talked about Dany trying to appease the Meereenese and stuff. And so this is the idea of Cinderella at the ball, wearing the gown, trying to fit in, and basically impress people in a way that's not really authentic to who she is, right?
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make her a better Daenerys specifically, it doesn't make her a better queen trying to fit in and be something she's not.
It kind of feels like she's splitting the difference, cutting the kid in half, if you will, doing it in a way that doesn't really make anybody happy. One sympathizes with her, but yeah, there's going to need to be a different strategy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So
mm-hmm.
We'll have to see what that is. So I've got the next two sections I have, and we could do this in either order. I've got the one where it says, the next one up is smashing the slave trade, which is kind of continuing on the same train of thought that we have been talking about. It's just that in the sort of middle part of the book, the focus is less on ruling Meereen and more on the broader slave trade. But I've also got the shorter section about her still looking for family, which has some of that Daario stuff you were talking about. Would you like to dive into that first?
Yeah, sure. So
I think that's what we should do.
Okay. So yeah, Dany wants safety and belonging, and she is trying to find that in Meereen, and she's trying to make it work. She's even taking a husband who, she doesn't hate and, isn't ugly, but he's no Daario. And what she wants more than anything is for Daario to take her away and to leave it all behind. And she's never going to do that because she knows that if she does do that, if she leaves, then the consequences of her leaving will be the slave trade coming right back, and all the work that she tried to do to free everybody will just be for nothing.
Yeah, and so this quote here that what I have is giving us a little glimpse of a daydream of happiness that she has with Daario that is basically smashed by reality when she wakes up. So go ahead and read this, because this gives us a real good feel for this emotion.
Yeah. "What is it?" she cried as Eerie shook her gently by the shoulder. It was the black of night outside. Something is wrong, she knew at once. Is it Daario? What happened? In her dream, they had been man and wife, simple folk who lived a simple life in a tall stone house with a red door. In her dream, he had been kissing her all over, her mouth, her neck, her breasts. "No, Khaleesi," Eerie murmured. "It is your eunuch Grey Worm and the bald men. Will you see them?" Yes, her hair was disheveled and her bedclothes all a tingle. Dany realized. "Help me dress. I'll have a cup of wine as well to clear my head, to drown my dream."
The bird timer went off. They've been peaceful and quiet for like 2 hours, and now they have
Birdies!
so we have birds. Say hi, Goose. Say hi, buddy. Can you say hi? Give me a kiss? Something? All right. Well, there's Goose. There's Cleo. I'm going to put him on the perches over here. It's trickier in this house that I live in now doing daytime streams. Cleo wants to stay on my shoulder, actually.
Yay, Cleo! She's pink,
Hopefully
so she's
they will. Hopefully they will keep moderately quiet, but I'll just have to manage it. So if you hear the muttering, that's Goose. Anyways, so that quote again, it's very sweet. You can see her wishing for home and happiness, the elusive family and sense of belonging that she doesn't have anywhere. And even though Daria was very silly looking, when you sort of forget about that, you really feel Dany's not only the crush energy, but just the desire for simple, basic happiness instead of being a ruler. And Cleo sometimes likes to anger translate the things that I say. And so hopefully you guys can continue to take me seriously, and the pink parrot on my shoulder won't hurt, detract from that. But yeah.
I don't think anyone minds.
I don't think anyone takes me seriously anyways. Hopefully not. It was
Cleo's
weird when everyone did that one time. So. Hi, girl. Hi. No, you're not stepping up. All right. So when Musador dies, Dany is a really nice scene of Dany comforting Missandei, and we see the themes of home and safety come up again, along with Dany's empathy. So go ahead and read this one.
Okay. Yeah, it made me cry when I reread this.
Yeah.
When she returned to her room atop the pyramid, she found Missandei crying softly on her pallet, trying as best she could to muffle the sound of her sobs. "Come sleep with me," she told the little scribe. "Dawn will not come for hours yet. Your grace is kind to this one." Missandei slipped under the sheets. "He was a good brother." Dany wrapped her arms about the girl. "Tell me of him." "He taught me how to climb a tree when we were little. He could catch fish with his hands. Once I found him sleeping in our garden with 100 butterflies crawling over him. He looked so beautiful that morning. I loved him. As he loved you." Dany stroked the girl's hair. "Say the word, my sweet, and I will send you from this awful place. I will find a ship somehow and send you home to Noth. I would sooner stay with you. On Noth I'd be afraid. What if the slaves came again? I feel safe when I'm with you." "Safe." The word made Dany's eyes fill up with tears. "I want to keep you safe." Missandei was only a child. With her, she felt as if she could be a child too. "No one ever kept me safe when I was little. Well, Sir Willem did, but then he died, and Viserys. I want to protect you, but it is so hard to be strong. I don't always know what I should do. I must know, though. I am all they have. I am the queen, the mother," Missandei whispered. "Mother to dragons," Dany shivered. "No, mother to us all." Missandei hugged her tighter. "Your grace should sleep. Dawn will be here soon, and court. We'll both sleep and dream of sweeter days. Close your eyes." When she did, Dany kissed her eyelids and made her giggle.
So I feel like this sums up Dany's A Dance with Dragons arc very well, and thank you for that good reading. She's worried about her dragons and the violence she's brought, and she shivers as she thinks of herself as the mother of dragons. I mean, that's really striking. She shivers after she says it. But Missandei points out that Dany is taking on this burden of wielding power in order to protect people, to be the mother to us all that provides safety to us all. Her desire to be strong comes from her desire to be what the people need because, quote, "a queen belongs to her people." Isn't that right, girl? That's right. I belong to her, and a queen belongs to her people.
Yeah, Cleo belongs to all of us.
Cleo, no one's listening to anything I'm saying, girl. Not a single person. No.
Yeah, they're all talking about Cleo.
Yeah, I see all these comments. I couldn't answer because I would have had to stop petting her. Oh, girl. All right, I'm going to put you down, girl. Come here. Okay, step down.
She loves it.
Step down. She does. She loves the attention. I don't know much longer this will go without her screaming, but we'll see. So, like I said, Dany is very hard on herself, and it's almost like Missandei is reminding her of her humanity here. And because Dany's really struggling with this idea of, am I a dragon? Am I a monster? What does that mean? Who could love me? And all this stuff. And Missandei is sort of reminding her, be like, no, you've used your power to help and protect people. And so the narrative continues with Dany unable to relax as Missandei falls asleep, and she's too concerned with her children. And I'm going to skim through this one here.
Cool.
It says, Dany shut her eyes and tried to think of home, of Dragonstone and King's Landing. But her thoughts kept turning back to Slaver's Bay, like ships caught in some bitter wind. When Missandei was sound asleep, Dany slipped from her arms and stepped out into the pre-dawn air to lean upon the cool brick parapet and gaze out across the city. Thank you very much, girl. Somewhere beneath those roofs, the sons of the Harpy were gathered, plotting ways to kill her, and all those who loved her and put her children back in chains. Somewhere down there, a hungry child was crying for milk. Somewhere, an old woman lay dying. Somewhere, a man and a maid embraced and fumbled at each other's clothes with eager hands. But up here, there was only the sheen of moonlight on pyramid and pits, with no hint what lay beneath. Up here, there was only her alone. She was the blood of the dragon. She could kill the sons of the Harpy and the sons of the sons, and the sons of the sons of the sons. But a dragon could not feed a hungry child nor help a dying woman's pain. And even though she has fed people, and even though she has eased people's pain, she's feeling inferior and insufficient. And specifically when she thinks about her as a dragon, it's like really depressing now, this idea that she's a dragon and all she can do is consume and burn and destroy and kill. And so it's really interesting inner turmoil here when you compare it back to her concept of being a dragon for inner strength in a Game of Thrones. It's really flipped around now for her.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like she hasn't come to the conclusion that you have yet, that her dragon identity is part of her mother identity. She's not a bad mother because she's a dragon. She's a great mother because she's a dragon, and she needs to remember that and embrace that. Otherwise, things are just going to keep getting worse.
I totally agree. Yeah, she's got to synthesize those two things. So, as let's see, as she thinks about dragons as creatures who can only destroy and not feed or help, even though she has done a lot of both, her thoughts turn back to herself and Daario and finding belonging. And go ahead and read this one.
And who would ever dare love a dragon? She found herself thinking of Daario Naharis once again. Daario with his gold tooth and trident beard, his strong hands resting on the hilt of his matched auroch and stiletto, wilts wrought of gold in the shapes of naked women. The day he took his leave of her, as she was bidding him farewell, he had brushed the balls of his thumbs lightly across them, back and forth. I am jealous of a sword hilt, she had realized, of women made of gold. Sending him to the Lamb Man had been wise. She was a queen, and Daario Naharis was not the stuff of kings.
So this isn't the first time that she's had this thought about who can possibly love me. And it's important to pick up this aspect of Dany's psyche. She doesn't think she's some all-powerful dragon hero who can do no wrong and who should be universally beloved. She worries about fitting in and finding love and doing the right thing. You know, like a normal person, like a non-psychopathic person does. And then when she worries about being the mother of monsters, she thinks that she must be a monster too, since she is blood of the dragon, blood of the monster. And this too contributes to a bit of really self-loathing, disgust, and definitely alienation. So her denial of her desire for Daario is a running plot piece throughout a dance. And of course, she does eventually give in and take him into her bed. Now, this doesn't seem to threaten her engagement to Hisdar, and she calls it off when she gets married. So I'm seeing this as a bit of self-indulgence that Dany allowed herself because the fallout was minimal. And really, I don't blame her. She doesn't do the foolish thing of imagining him a king and marrying him, which is a mistake that other Targaryen monarchs have made. Think of Aegon the Unlikely and his kids who married for love and caused political problems. In other words, she's making the political marriage for the good of the nation that she needs to, and having a little Daario on the side, which to me seems reasonable. So
Yeah.
that's how I see that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, she's a teenage girl, and she uses the, oh, I'm just a young girl thing all the time to, as you say, troll people. But she really is. She's a young girl and wants that love and security, and in a romantic way that she had with Drogo and hasn't had since. And people question, or people ask, well, why does this protagonist need a love interest for the story to be interesting? And I agree for the most part, but it's because she wants one. She wants love and acceptance and to feel like a queen, and or not to feel like a queen, but to feel like Daenerys and not just someone who has the weight of the world on her shoulders.
Yeah, and That's a great point. And A Girl in the chat is making a great point. Thinking no one will love you is a symptom of surviving trauma. And she does. She thinks she's too damaged or broken to love. And you really feel for that. This is the inner heart and conflict stuff that George always talks about. And yeah, it's just, I mean, we're getting such a big window into Dany's psyche. And again, I would say it doesn't look like Cersei's psyche. But I thought of an interesting comparison. Think about Robb Stark, okay? Robb becomes king at the age of 15. It's comparable to Dany. He has parents and training where Dany does not. But what happens when he falls in love with Jane Westerling? He was already committed to a political marriage with the Freys, but married for love anyways, and got himself killed and got the North. You know, he turned Roose Bolton and other people against him by doing that. And Dany did not do that. Dany could have. She was in love with Dario and could have tried to make him a king and see him as a king, but she never was fooled about that. She's always very clear that he's not a king. So a little more clear, because Jane Westerling was not a politically suitable marriage for Robb, especially when he already had one. So again, like even Robb, who's not a bad guy, like Dany's doing better than he did. So
it was a good strategic marriage for the Lannisters.
Yeah, well, it worked out for the Lannisters. Yeah. All right. So, yes, and Ball says just because Dany thinks she's broken and unlovable doesn't mean she is, nor does a sign she's going mad or whatever BS that people are saying. And of course, that is true. And it's the same thing for her, wondering whether or not she's mad, wondering whether or not she's a monster. This kind of self-reflection is healthy. The real monsters you don't see asking that question about themselves. So. And here is, we'll just read this quote. It's a little brief look at the happiness that she finds with Dario temporarily in her 7th Dance with Dragons chapter. So let's give Dany this little moment here.
Okay. If she had been some ordinary woman, she would gladly have spent her whole life touching Dario, tracing his scars and making him tell her how he'd come by everyone. I would give up my crown if he asked it of me, Dany thought. But he had not asked it and never would. Dario might whisper words of love when the two of them were as one, but she knew it was the Dragon Queen he loved. If I gave up my crown, he would not want me. Besides, kings who lost their crowns oft lost their heads as well, and she could see no reason why it would be any different for a queen.
There you go. And let me click back onto this page. So, you know, it's again just her little fantasy in the privacy of her own room. She thinks about running away and leaving all of this, and you can certainly relate to that. But she's also perceptive to understand that Dario is attracted to the Dragon Queen, and that without her crown, that he might not love her. So like she understands, even though she's indulging in the crush, like unlike Tyrion with Tysha, but with Shay, like Dany never forgets that he's a sellsword and that she can't trust him, and that he is attracted to her for her dragons and her power and her greatness, and not necessarily for who she really is on the inside, because who she really is on the inside is someone who wants to protect people, and Dario doesn't understand that at all. He's just like, yeah, butcher them. That's all you have to do. Just some pretext, red wedding, do it. So that is a big disconnect between her and Dario's, that lack of shared values.
Yeah, and I really like the difference between them, because I think it shows, yeah, he doesn't really love her for her. He loves her for her image, much like the people of Meereen. It's just they love her for a different image. They love her if she is having an image of a Giscari queen, where Dario loves the image of the Dragon Queen, but none of them want her or love her for her.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. Yeah. And then she's perceptive to realize that. So, okay. So now we're going to go back up to smashing the slave trade here. And I have to go through some of these quotes pretty quickly. We are getting close to 2 hours here on the stream. Thank you all for staying with us. We got 135 watching, which is
Yay!
More than whatever other live stream is going on right now. I didn't just check. Anyways, smashing the slave trade. In A Dance with Dragons, Dany 3, when Dany is hosting Xaro, the topic of the slave trade comes up, and Zaro says, "Whence came this madness? Should I count myself fortunate that you did not free my own slaves when you were my guest in Karth?" Dany thinks, "I was a beggar queen, and you were Zaro the 13, and all you wanted were my dragons." She says, "Your slaves seemed well treated and content. It was not until Astapor that my eyes were opened. Do you know how unsullied are made and trained? Cruelly, I have no doubt. When a smith makes a sword, he thrusts the blade into the fire, beats on it with a hammer, then plunges it into iced water to temper the steel. If you would savor the sweet taste of the fruit, you must water the tree. This tree has been watered with blood," Dany says. "How else to grow a soldier? Your radiance enjoyed my dancers. Would it surprise you to know that they are slaves, bred and trained in Yunkai? They have been dancing since they were old enough to walk. How else to achieve such perfection?" Now, of course, slavery is not the only way to achieve excellence in the arts or athletic events, but it's the only way that Zaro can conceive of because he's only lived in slave societies. Now, as for Dany, we see that the difference between the well-treated household slaves that she saw in Karth and the poorly treated slaves that we see in Slaver's Bay is essentially the reason why she only became an abolitionist in Astapor. But it's perceptive of her to go back and realize that she didn't see the reality of it and why. So this is all very interesting conversation to me here. And the watering the tree with the blood thing kind of reminds me of Cinderella and like the fact that she watered the tree with her tears.
Yep, I was going to point that out. I'm glad you included that because, yeah, and in a way, Dany waters her, I guess, rain with blood in a different way, or that's how she sees herself. She feels like she grows her reign and her kingdom from violence. And also, Joe Snow said, "How else to grow Lightbringer?" And I thought of that as well.
Yeah, and totally. So I've talked about this quote from a symbolic angle, talking about soldiers, the green zombies, the idea of resurrecting people through Weirwood magic to make a super soldier. And that's what's going to happen with Jon, essentially. And so, yeah, we're watering a tree with blood to make either a soldier or a Valyrian steel sword, depending on the metaphor. I can think of a super soldier who's a lot like Valyrian steel, Jon Snow, of course. So interesting little bit there. There's a lot of symbolism. And yes, white tears and red tears, like at the cat wedding. But let's not get lost in the symbolism here. We're going to keep going because we're short on time. And so let's see. The notion of watering a tree with blood or treating a soldier like a piece of steel to be beaten, it's on the theme of what is it worth? It's a question that Dany asks herself. She's been wrestling with it the entire story. She has these various goals, but what is she willing to do to achieve them? Now, generally, she has stuck to her values and then used her guile or dragon power to escape the ensuing jam that she finds herself in. Oh, girl, come here.
Dany is a total Aquarius archetype. Love it. Actually, do you know that Aquarius is an air sign? It's not a water sign.
No, I did not know that.
Khaleesi Targaryen. Yeah, Aquarius is an air sign. So, as silly as that is.
And then so, let's see here. Okay, so like I was saying, when she sticks to her values and often ends up in a sort of a jam, and then she uses either guile and wisdom or her dragon power to sort of break out of the jam. And that's essentially what she's communicating to Zaro. She's saying that making soldiers or dancers or anything else in such a way that removes their autonomy is wrong. And it's flat out wrong, and she won't bend on that. And then so when Zaro offers to give the slave dancers to Dany, she just offers to free them. And it says that made him wince. And what would they do with freedom? As well give a fish a suit of mail, which I think is funny because the Tullys wear suits of mail that look like fish. They were made to dance. And then she says, made by who? Their masters? Perhaps your dancers would sooner build or bake or farm. Have you asked them? And then he says, perhaps your elephants would sooner be nightingales. Instead of sweet song, Meereen's nights would be filled with thunderous trumpetings, and your trees would shatter beneath the weight of great gray birds. I just think Zaro's hilarious sometimes. He says, Daenerys, my delight, beneath that sweet young breast beats a tender heart. But take counsel from an older, wiser head. Things are not always as they seem. Much that may seem evil can be good. Consider rain. Rain? Does he take me for a fool or just a child? We curse the rain when it falls upon our heads, yet without it we should starve. The world needs rain and slaves. You make a face, but it is true. Consider Karth. In art, music, magic, trade, and all that makes us more than beasts, Karth sits above the rest of mankind, as you sit at the summit of this pyramid. But below, in place of bricks, the magnificence that is the queen of cities rests upon the backs of slaves. Ask yourself, if all men must grub in the dirt for food, how shall any man lift his eyes to contemplate the stars? If each of us must break his back to build a hovel, who shall raise the temples to glorify the gods? For some men to be great, others must be enslaved. He was too eloquent for her. Dany had no answer for him, only the raw feeling in her belly. Slavery is not the same as reign, she insisted. I have been reigned on and I have been sold. It is not the same. No man wants to be owned. So Zaro is basically talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. But the only way he can think to achieve the higher levels is with a slave society. Dany is concerned with free will, on the other hand. What if the elephants want to act like nightingales? Who has the right to enforce their elephant behavior, right, girl? Yeah. You feeling the revolution, girl? It's okay. Okay. So she's saying who has the, basically who has the right to enforce these societal roles. And of course, we're not talking about elephants and nightingales, really, but of people, not different species, people who are being forced to do things against their will. And once again, we see that Dany's time as a slave greatly informs her perspective. Mm-hmm. So next comes some hard truths about the economic reality in the wake of slavery in Meereen. And go ahead and read this passage. This is an important one.
Okay. Zaro gave a languid shrug. As it happens, when I came ashore in your sweet city, I chanced to see upon the riverbank a man who had once been a guest in my manse, a merchant who dealt in rare spices and choice wines. He was naked from the waist up, red and peeling, and seemed to be digging a hole. Not a hole, a ditch, to bring water from the river to the fields. We mean to...
Did Alyssa get frozen, guys? She's frozen on my screen.
No, surely not. You have no slaves in Meereen. Dany flushed. Your friend is being paid with food and shelter. I cannot give him back his wealth. Meereen needs beans more than it needs rare spices, and beans require water. Would you set my dancers to digging ditches as well? Sweet queen, when he saw me, my old friend fell to his knees and begged me to buy him as a slave and take him back to Karth. She felt as if he'd slap her. Buy him then. If it pleases you, I know it would please him.
Your mic cut out halfway during that, and my cockatoo is yelling also. So I have thrown the quote up on the screen. Cockatoo, please calm down.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good now. You disappeared for like 10 seconds and you came back, and then that was it. So in any case, the point is this guy who used to be a wine merchant is now digging an irrigation ditch to plant beans. And so there's a question of autonomy and, well, he wants to sell himself as a slave and all this stuff. And so while nobody feels sorry for those who grew wealthy on Meereen's slave economy, having to dig irrigation ditches, and let me go ahead and here we go. There we are. The underlying reality here is that Meereen's transition away from slavery has been tough. Now, presumably work is so hard to find that ditch digger in exchange for food and shelter is essentially the best job that this wine merchant could find. And one assumes it's probably not the wine seller that Scott has tortured from the last chapter. Well, who knows? Maybe it's the same guy. In any case, but if you think about it, what's happening here is basically the Meereenese economy and society were based on slave labor. And with that source of free labor now gone, everyone has to pitch in to do actual work. And there's also more work created by the simple idea of a societal transition, repairing from all the damage. And so those who enjoyed a cushy life before simply may have to roll up their sleeves and dig a ditch. And I think that is somewhat reasonable. But the bigger question here is what to call it when someone wants to, quote unquote, sell themselves into slavery. Because slavery, by definition, we think of as forced labor without autonomy. And so if someone wants to sell themselves into a specific labor position, it's sort of a gray area at that point. I'm not sure if that's exactly slavery. And again, you have to go back to the whole Roman society. The way that they use slavery is not quite the same as we think about it. The bottom rung slaves are the kind of slaves we think of, but then they also have the well-trained, basically people whose roles would be filled by normally free men in our society: teachers, doctors, physicians, nanny, daycare, whatever, are filled by these higher rung slaves. And so that's what we're seeing here, is that only these highest level of well-treated slave positions are ones that anyone would choose to sell themselves into. Like, the docks aren't full of people trying to sell themselves into a life of like hard labor. So this is the simple reality, is that given time, the slave economy would need to be replaced by some sort of merchant economy. And these skilled slave positions would be filled, as they are in our society, by free people. So it's not so much that there is any redeemable aspect of the slavery in Slaver's Bay, so much as that it is difficult to bring about a sudden change on the level that Dany's trying to achieve. However, Dany is taking it very hard and feeling like she is failing. She does express confidence, though, that things will get better one day. When Xaro calls Meereen,
"A poor city that once was rich, a hungry city that once was fat, a bloody city that once was peaceful." His accusations stung. There was too much truth in them. Meereen will be rich and fat and peaceful once again, and free as well. Go to the Dothraki if you must have slaves.
And so, like I said, she's taking it very hard. There is some truth to it, even though it's sort of again, Xaro's perspective comes from a worldview that can only see a slave society as the solution. So it's a one-sided view, but there is truth to it. Now, Xaro counters that you will not make Meereenese rich and fat and peaceful. You will only bring it to destruction as you did Astapor. Now, the jury is still out on that, but Astapor is definitely suffering. And read this passage here. This is a gut-wrenching one.
Oh, okay. Only 4 petitioners awaited her that morning. As ever, Lord Gael was the first to present himself, looking even more wretched than usual. "Your radiance," he moaned as he fell to the marble at her feet. "The armies of the Yunkai descend on Astapor. I beg you, come south with all your strength." "I warned your king that this war of his was folly," Dany reminded him. He would not listen. "Great Cleon sought only to strike down the vile slavers of Yunkai. Great Cleon is a slaver himself. I know that the Mother of Dragons will not abandon us in our hour of peril. Lend us your Unsullied to defend our walls. And if I do, who will defend my walls? Many of my freedmen were slaves in Astapor. Perhaps some will wish to help you defend your king. That is their choice as free men. I gave Astapor its freedom. It is up to you to defend it. We are all dead then. You gave us death, not freedom." Gale leapt to his feet and spat into her face.
So that's pretty tough. I mean, that hurts. These are the people that remained in Astapor. Dany left a council of people she thought were responsible and wise to rule. It all went to shit, and everybody's dying. And it gets worse, as we find out. And Dany she really couldn't come. And there's a similar problem that she's going to face when she thinks about leaving Meereen for Westeros. And I'll take this one here. It says, "Reznak gave a piteous moan. Then it is true. Your worship means to abandon us." He wrung his hands. "The Yunkai will restore the great masters the instant you are gone. And we who have so faithfully served your cause will be put to the sword, our sweet wives and maiden daughters raped and enslaved." "Not mine," grumbled Skahaz Shavepate. "I will kill them first with mine own hand." He slapped his sword hilt. Dany felt as if he had slapped her face instead. "If you fear what may follow when I leave, come with me to Westeros." So she's really feeling the pain of the pinch here, and just the lack of a good solution. And so they're discussing Xaro's offer to give them 13 ships to take them back to Westeros, which of course Barristan is in favor of. And then a moment later, the conversation continues. It says, "Those left behind in Meereen would envy them their easy deaths," moaned Reznak, talking about the people who would die on the march to Westeros. "They will make slaves of us, or throw us in the pits. All will be as it was, or worse." "Where is your courage?" Sir Barristan lashed out. "Her grace freed you from your chains. It is for you to sharpen your swords and defend your own freedom when she leaves." "Brave words from one who means to sail into the sunset," Simon Stripeback snarled back. "Will you look back at our dying?" So it's true that the citizens of Astapor or Meereen will have to be responsible and are responsible for manifesting their own destiny on a certain level. But it's also true that Dany is the one who toppled the social order and bears responsibility for the fallout. And she's taking that responsibility. That's the complexity going on here. Simply because chaos has ensued doesn't necessarily mean that it was wrong for Dany to slay the masters and free the slaves. There are simply no guarantees when it comes to revolution. And Dany, of course, is very much lacking in experience about how to handle this. So the same problem will likely exist, like I said, when she gets back to Meereen in the Winds of Winter and again thinks about leaving, unless Tyrion and whomever else are able to make progress on setting up a new economy. We've already talked about that. It'll be very interesting to see how Martin resolves that. And like we both said, she's not leaving until it is resolved somehow. So Dany muses about going home after telling Barristan to look over those 13 ships. And go ahead and read this one.
Okay. Westeros, home. But if she left, what would happen to her city? Meereen was never your city, her brother's voice seemed to whisper. Your cities are across the sea, your 7 kingdoms where your enemies await you. You are born to serve them fire and blood.
So this is really like a warm-up for her last chapter, isn't it? With Viserys talking to her.
Yeah, I can't wait.
And as you can see, this is a thought which buys into that false dichotomy of you either have to be a dragon or a mother who protects people. And so Viserys' voice in her mind is suggesting that her purpose is to be a dragon and to serve fire and blood to her enemies. But clearly Dany's heart longs to provide safety and security to her people. That's what she really cares about. And this tension is going to have to be resolved, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And the person who came to tell her that she brought them death, not freedom, I like that George included that. You brought us death, not freedom, because in season 8, the episode that shall not be named contained that, and apparently that was her motivation. But here, clearly in the book, that's not what she wants, and that's not what she thinks. She doesn't equate freedom and death.
Yeah, no, very well said. And so she sees what will happen if she leaves and decides to stay. And she says, enough. Dany slapped the table. No one will be left to die. You are all my people. Her dreams of home and love had blinded her. I will not abandon Meereen to the fate of Astapor. It grieves me to say so, but Westeros must wait. So it's kind of a defining moment for her. We've hit this one a bunch of times. You don't need to belabor it. I do want to point out that Dany is planting beans, though. She's also planting olive trees. And she tells Zara when he asks about olive oil to trade, she says, I've got none to offer. The slavers burned the trees. But we are replanting. It takes 7 years before an olive trees begin to bear and 30 years before it can truly be called productive. So dragons do plant trees. They plant beans. They take care of people, et cetera, as we've said many times.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. I'm trying to see if I can skim through some of this a little quicker. Okay, so this whole next section is about hearing of the fall of Astapor and the coming of the Pale Mare. And the tough thing about it is that she keeps hearing about the people that were waiting for her. They say, others blame Daenerys, said the Weaver, and this is a Weaver from Astapor. But more of us loved you. She is on her way, we said to one another. She is coming at the head of a great host with food for all. And she thinks to herself, I can scarce feed my own folk. If I had marched to Astapor, I would have lost Meereen. And then they say again, they swore they had seen you mounted on a dragon flying high above the camps of the Yunkai. Every day we looked for you. And she says, I could not come. I dare not. And so it's, again, just feel that conflict that Dany feels of not being able to be everywhere at the same time. And the news gets even worse as they hear about the Pale Mare. Hundreds of thousands of sick refugees are on the way. And Resnack and Brown Ben Plum are saying, don't let him in the city. And you got to separate the good apples from the bad. She says, these aren't apples, Ben. These are my children. They're men and women, sick and hungry. I should have gone to Astapor. So no, she shouldn't have gone to Astapor. She would have lost Meereen, but nevertheless, she's holding herself to this impossible standard because she's the one who caused all this turmoil to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so let's see here. She's thinking about whether her hands are clean of blood, and they're not. She's remembered what Dario had said, all kings must be butchers or meat. And so she's thinking about that, and she's saying maybe if I had gone and helped out Astapor, we could have crushed Yunkai. But the Shave Pay points out that it wouldn't have worked. And she says, I know. It's Aroa all over again. And Brown Ben Plum doesn't know Aroa, so he asks about what that is. And she says, a girl I thought I'd save from rape and torment. All I did was make it worse for her in the end. All I did in Astapor was make 10,000 Aroas. So that is really heartbreaking to think about her contemplating that. Like, we know how much Aroa messed up Dany. And so now she's thinking about making 10,000 Aroas. So George is basically just trying to show us that this is not a character shirking the consequences of her actions. She's fully feeling the weight of all of it, and it's almost crushing her, really.
Mm-hmm. And I think the Pale Mare, or maybe this is something for another time, but the Pale Mare and the people she wants to take care of and she feels bad because they got this sickness, I think is more foreshadowing. And also helps support our theory, or what's not even theory, but is probably just fact and what is going to happen, that she's gonna go north to help the people instead of doing what she feels like she's doing here and staying in the castle.
100%. And the more you read through these chapters, the more you realize that the foreshadowing of her turning north to face the others is pretty heavy. I mean, it's the only thing that really makes sense to me. So there's a really interesting part about Dany's values that comes with this realization about Astapor, and it directly leads to Dany marrying Hisdar in an effort to stop the violence. So it says, "God," she prayed, "you took Khal Drogo, who was my son and stars. You took our valiant son before he drew a breath. You have had your blood of me. Help me now, I pray you. Give me the wisdom to see the path ahead and the strength to do what I must to keep my children safe." The gods did not respond. When she opened her eyes again, Daenerys said, "I cannot fight two enemies, one within and one without. If I am to hold Meereen, I must have the city behind me, the whole city. I need," she couldn't say it, "Your Grace?" And then she thinks to herself, no, that's not what she thinks to herself. She thinks to herself, "A queen belongs to herself, but not to herself, but to her people." And she says, "I need Hisdar." So basically, this is where she decides to sacrifice her own freedom. And again, I pointed out before that she was in a forced marriage, a marital rape situation with Drogo. It turned better over time, but it means a lot for her to so soon after that give up her freedom again. Like, think about Cersei fighting Tywin on the idea of being married off a second time after dealing with Robert. She won't do it. And so Dany does do it to, again, keep her people safe. And you just hear her praying, "Give me the wisdom and strength to do what I must to keep my children safe." Like, there's no more clear enunciation of your values than what you pray for in the privacy of your own, room or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And she says to protect my children. And right now, being the mother of dragons and the mother of her people, it's the same thing. We're going.
Good one, Carl Carson.
I already ran errands in this outfit today. It's fine.
That's right.
Anyways, yeah.
So you can see why I chose these words as a title, right? "A queen belongs not to herself but to her people" is a statement of values for Dany. It reflects her view of what makes a good king in the platonic sense, if you will. It's one of the main reasons why the show ending didn't make any sense as a resolution of her character arc. There was no believable reason offered for HBO Dany to so completely betray her core values.
Mm-hmm.
I have to think the reason George is showing us repeated and consistent examples of Dany's unshakable commitment to self-sacrifice to keep her people safe is because her arc will climax with sacrificing herself and her dragons to save the people of Westeros. It's like, don't overthink it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But just as you said a minute ago, Ollie, it's like I can't really think of an ending that would make sense other than something along those lines.
I don't know how to change names. Says Dany should take the refugees to Valyria and repopulate the city. Yeah. If we were to get a happy ending in which Dany doesn't sacrifice to defeat the others, and she's definitely gonna die, that would be, I think, the best place for her story and for her to live happily ever after.
We're just gonna need a lot of sage and stuff.
Yeah.
Sort of.
We need whatever Sam got.
Get the bad mojo out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the Doom, seriously though, the Doom does still hold in Valyria, so I don't think anybody can resettle there just yet. They need some Santeria or something, like I was saying. But so let's see here. And then, of course, if you want to see the setup for a character who will eventually choose to massacre innocents, one has only to look at Cersei, whose inner monologue and choices reveal a set of values completely opposite of Dany's. So again, I say to the people getting that confused, like, one character is heading towards massacring innocents. That's what it looks like. It looks like Cersei.
Yeah.
If you look at Dany's arc and think that's where it's heading, you're not good at reading. I don't know what else to say, like straight up, at least not literary analysis. But yeah, anyways. So this is never more evident than in the way Dany treats the refugees from Astapor once they get there. Dany 6 opens with her visiting the disease-ridden refugee camps against the advice of her counselors. Go ahead and read this paragraph. This is really important.
Even feeding them had grown difficult. Every day she sent them what she could, but every day there were more of them and less food to give them. It was growing harder to find drivers willing to deliver the food as well. Too many of the men they had sent into the camp had been stricken by the flux themselves. Others had been attacked on the way back to the city. Yesterday a wagon had been overturned and 2 of her soldiers killed, so today the queen had determined that she would bring them food herself. Every one of her advisors had argued fervently against it, from Resnek and the Shavepate to Sir Barristan, but Daenerys would not be moved. I will not turn away from them, she said stubbornly. A queen must know the sufferings of her people. Read that like 10 times. You're muted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's a good partner catching my meetings. So yeah, she's heading out to take care of things herself, if you will. And the sufferings that she sees are truly great. And after a whole list of horrors, we read, Dany saw one man sprawled on the dirt under a black cloak, but as she rode past, his cloak dissolved into 1,000 flies. Skeletal women sat upon the ground, clutching dying infants. Their eyes followed her. Those who had the strength called out, Mother, please, Mother, bless you, Mother. Bless me, Dany thought bitterly. Your city has gone to ash and bone. Your people are dying all around you. I have no shelter for you, no medicine, no hope. Only stale bread and wormy meat, hard cheese, a little milk. Bless me, bless me. What kind of mother has no milk to feed her children? So again, just more anguish over not being able to take care of everyone. Shows you where her values are. So then Dany springs into action herself, as she always does, because she's a lead from the front type of ruler. So go ahead and grab this one. This is great.
Sir Barristan watched with ill-concealed apprehension. You should not linger here over long, your grace. The Astapori are being fed, as you commanded. There's no more we can do for the poor wretches. We should repair back to the city. Go if you wish, sir. I will not detain you. I will not detain any of you. Dany vaulted down from the horse. I cannot heal them, but I can show them that their mother cares. Jogo sucked in his breath. Khaleesi, no. The bell in his braid rang softly as he dismounted. You must not get any closer. Do not let them touch you. Do not. Dany walked right past him. There was an old man on the ground a few feet away, moaning and staring up at the gray belly of the clouds. She knelt beside him, wrinkling her nose at the smell, and pushed back his dirty gray hair to feel his brow. His flesh is on fire. I need water to bathe him. Sea water will serve. Marcelin, will you fetch some for me? I need oil as well for the pyre. Who will help me burn the dead? By the time Aggo returned with Grey Worm and 50 of the Unsullied loping behind his horse, Dany had shamed all of them into helping her.
So, in my opinion, 2 books just isn't enough time to turn someone doing stuff like this into someone who's going to massacre innocents intentionally. So, and, you know, typical of the people who believe that Dany is going to burn King's Landing, who are now popping into my chat, you guys have no arguments. All you ever do is come in and say, well, too bad she's actually going to burn King's Landing. I think she's going to go mad. So there, LML's going to be mad when she actually does burn King's Landing. It's like, y'all at least come in here with an argument, you know, because the fact that you don't have anything stronger than that basically shows that you don't have an argument. So you can keep repeating yourself if you want to, but I will enjoy my sweet vindication when Winds of Winter and eventually A Dream of Spring comes out in like 3 decades. But there you go. Troll's going to troll. Exactly. You guys like my voice. It's my troll voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we did it. We got through all of my notes. Yay! That was a miracle.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead now. We've sort of picked apart your notes all to hell. We've pulled from different parts. But what I've basically stopped here is right before Daznak's pit and Dany wandering around eating green berries and tripping her nuts off on the grass sea. So feel free. I will let you just pick any of the points that you have here to dive in as a starting point to discuss that last little bit of action here.
Great.
And typically, when I've been doing these Dany streams, Alisa, I have found that the last couple chapters are the ones I talk about the least, because it's the climactic action that everybody remembers. And mostly what I'm trying to do is highlight the character building moments, the more subtle stuff that everyone missed and went by the board. But the interesting thing about the climactic chapters is that this last one, especially where she's wandering around in the grass sea, she's really coming smack up against this whole idea of who is she? What is the Mysa? What is the Dragon Mother? What is Fire and Blood? What does meaning a Targaryen be? Quay's whispering in her ears. So it's definitely central to all these questions that we've been talking about.
Did you want me to pick something from the pit chapter or her last chapter?
Wherever you think would be best to go next. We'll give you discretion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in the scene in the pit, because yes, lots of people remember it, but it also goes by so fast because everything happens so fast. Kind of the same with the House of the Undying. Like, all of these phrases are going by really quickly, and you have to really pay attention to catch them. Okay. So again, she repeats, if I turn back, I am lost. And she thinks a lot about, oh my God, I was reading the other one. Yeah, she's thinking about the sounds of the drumming and how happy her people are to be seeing the violence and to see a woman completely mauled by a boar. And then they're completely horrified when Drogon just like eats it. He didn't even do the killing, but oh no, it's a dragon, so that's terrible. So on page 764 of the Mass Market paperback edition, Sir Barristan held her tightly. "Look away, your grace." "Let me go," Dany twisted from his grasp. The world seemed to slow as she cleared the parapet. When she landed in the pit, she lost a sandal. Which is... Okay, so I consider this part where she's being surrounded by all this violence, which she absolutely hates. She can't stand it. She's dressed in her tokar, or she's just like barely taking it off because she wants to take off her floppy ears. She's sick of it, and then and she's uncomfortable and she's not being herself. And so when Drogon comes, Drogon the dragon also happens to be the chariot card in the Game of Thrones tarot deck, just saying, supports my argument. She is running away from the second ball, this big gathering, this big celebration of violence and of Meereenese culture, and in a way, a kind of party or that celebrates the union between Daenerys and Hizdahr Zalorak. So Drogon senses her frustration and comes to her, and she runs to him, and when she does, she loses a shoe. And everyone's trying to tell her no, and people are trying to kill Drogon. There's a brave, stupid dragon slayer who gets eaten. But it's this moment when she leaves the ball, she leaves the pit, and she mounts on Drogon, that she realizes he is fire made flesh, she thought, and so am I. This is when she becomes herself again and reconnects with her children, and it required her to leave physically, not just to daydream about it or to imagine it or to consider the possibilities. She is again taking action as she does, and goes to stop Drogon, and then ends up mounting him and flying away. And then in the Dothraki Sea, I think that's where she realizes that who she is, the dragon and the dragon mother and the mother and the Misa, they're all the same. They're not two different things. They have to be together. And I think this is like Cinderella, who she left the ball 3 times, And it wasn't until that she remembered who she was and was in her normal clothes and was just herself and not performing for anybody that she got her quote unquote happy ending. We know.
So if I could pause you right there, that's a great point. And it really is like so graphic. Like she undresses from the tow car, which is the floppy ears. And then sure, her clothes are torn, they're burnt, her hair is burnt. Like she completely sheds all the trappings that she had. And she goes back to the primal Valerian state of like eating raw meat alongside the dragon. You know, such a raw scene where she's eating the horse meat right before the Khalasar shows up. So yeah, she's definitely reconnecting with her roots here. That doesn't mean that she's going to necessarily become a psychopath and have a violent future path or whatever it is. But she's definitely, like I said, going to have to figure out how to synthesize her dragon nature and her Mysa instincts, because she basically tried repressing the dragon side in Meereen, and that did not work. So she has to synthesize instead of repress. It's good mental health lessons. So yeah, and let's see, I had one other thought based on what you said. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, so the 3 things about fleeing the wedding 3 times. It was one of the coolest similarities that you found. So go through your little House of the Undying bit right here.
Okay.
With the 3 weddings that she fled and how that mirrors the 3 loves, the 3 mounts that she has.
Got it.
Right.
Got it. Okay, so
this is really cool.
And everyone knows that the rule of 3 is very important in all fairy tales, but especially in Cinderella. So in the House of the Undying, it says, 3 fires must you light, 1 for life, 1 for death, 1 to love. 3 mounts will you ride, 1 to bed, 1 to dread, and 1 to love. 3 treasons will you know, once for blood, once for gold, and once for love. And so basically my thesis is that Daenerys' role as a Cinderella character indicates that she must seat herself amongst the ashes and embrace who she truly is, which she does here, in order to become the queen she wants to be and is destined to be. And because Cinderella left the ball 3 times and ultimately was embraced for being herself, Daenerys will also ultimately abandon the role of being a queen and embrace who she truly is, a mother and the mother of dragons and the mother to her people. So Daenerys fled her first wedding on her mount, on her silver, the mount to bed. That was her first wedding and the first ball that she fled. And here she is fleeing her marriage to Hisdar and the politics of Meereen, and she's mounting Drogon, the mount to dread. And so there's 1 left, and I believe that that she will flee the politics of the Iron Throne. That will be the 3rd ball, and she will fight the others alongside Jon Snow, and when she flees, that will be on the mount to love. And you can look at that love as the love for her people, or the love of life and not death, or her love for Jon Snow, and I don't think that any of those are completely exclusive from each other.
I think Jon Snow will be in Ghost, the wolf, and Dany will ride Ghost, and that will be how the Jon's a mount.
I would love that. That sounds great.
I'm mostly kidding there, but so just to recap what you just said, her first wedding with Drogo, she didn't like run away from the wedding, but she kind of did. Like she was feeling overwhelmed and trapped. She got on her silver and then all of a sudden felt free and ran around and was feeling all light spirited until she came back and then realized she had to do the wedding night stuff. So there is definitely a fleeing the wedding symbolism on a mount on her silver. And then she flees, obviously, Daznak's pit on Drogon. And the interesting thing about Drogon is that, Goose got startled off his perch. It's okay, buddy. Is that if you remember, hang on one second. I was going to bring up the point about how she thinks about Dario rescuing her, but hang on one second.
Okay. I'm going to look at the chat. Thank you, Ball. And thank you, Khaleesi Targaryen. Yeah, and you were right. Yeah, Aquarius does mean water bearer.
And actually, pause. I want to go back to a comment in the chat about the Kali stuff. Let's see here. Someone was bringing up the Kali correlation to Khaleesi. but I wasn't sure where they're going with that, and I just love that topic. So wherever that was, if you could repeat that question. And anyways, let's see. So the idea is that she thinks about Dario rescuing her, and then it's Drogon who rescues her from Daznax and her marriage to Hisdar. But the thing is, as you guys know, Drogon is just the foremost black dragon symbol, right? The black and red, the black shadow, all this stuff. The thing is, Jon Snow, of course, is also that black dragon archetype. I've been talking about that since the very beginning of all the Bloodstone Compendium. So when you see this idea of either Dario rescuing her and then actually Drogon rescues her, well, if you put those together, Dario seems to, in some cases, foreshadow Euron, but other times he seems to be a placeholder for Jon. And so the idea that Jon and Drogon or something will come and take Dany away from the last, she might even have a political wedding in King's Landing. What if she agrees to marry Fagon and then decides to walk away from that? We've all been thinking she'll take King's Landing from Fagon and kill him and feel bad. What if she this whole thing happens again where she does a political marriage to try to stabilize things and realizes that that's not the right answer?
That feels a lot more likely too, with who she is. Plus, if she buys into the whole Trugon thing, then I think that would be the perfect scenario, which would make her decision to leave it all and go north even harder, but still true to her character.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah, and I think it would have to be Fagon Trugon. I don't see anyone else that she would be betrothed to there, that she would run away from to go north. So we shall see.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. So that's a really cool Cinderella correlation, the idea of fleeing the 3 weddings, and the fact that she lost her slipper when she fled Daznax is a really nice correlation.
Mm-hmm. And the only reason it really stuck out to me, because like you said, Sansa loses a slipper, and Varys' slippers are mentioned a million times, apparently. But it's the fact that she loses it and then climbs on a mount and leaves, and also that she was gifted a pair of slippers that didn't fit her earlier, that really made the connection. Yeah. Good job, George.
There you go. And so we are at 2.5 hours. So if you have any last points you want to get in here, now's the time. And then I think we're going to go ahead and look to wrap it up.
Okay. I don't really have any other points that belong in this stream. But
right, you got some of the foreshadowing stuff. Yeah. So we'll hold that. We do have, there are all kinds of cool symbolic, mythical foreshadowings. So yeah.
Yeah.
Night King stuff having to do with Jon, stuff having to do with fighting the others. So we'll collect all that together in a few weeks. It'll be after the whole Ideas of March series. So this will probably be in April that we'll get back to this series. But
in spring. What a coincidence. And Carl Karsnark asks, do you have other Song of Ice and Fire geek friends IRL? No, I have 0 A Song of Ice and Fire geek friends IRL. That's why I stalk, or I don't stalk. That's why I pay so much attention to Quinn and to LML and to everyone else who talks about it, because that's how I get my energy out. And I thank you again so much for reading my notes and giving me this chance to interact with everybody and talk about this character that I love in my favorite story arc, even though it might be the most boring.
Well, it's definitely what I would call challenging. It's not fireworks and easy victories and stuff, but it's really important material. And I think George put a lot of thought into it. So here's the Kali point. And by the way, Ali, thank you for coming on, and you're a very welcome addition to our Mythhead Circle, and you brought a lot of great ideas today. I know everyone enjoyed it. So thank you on behalf of everyone.
Thank you.
John McNair says, so Khaleesi is a hint towards the Hindu goddess Kali, which I agree with. I've made that point before. A loving mother who fiercely defends her beliefs, but is also known to flip easily to a war goddess. Very true. I think her performing Sati enforces the Kali hint. So what is Sati? Do you know? I don't know off the top of my head.
I did 2 years ago. But
a former practice in India whereby a widow threw herself onto her husband's funeral pyre.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay, yeah. So when your husband dies, you're supposed to throw yourself onto a funeral pyre. And yeah, she does the exact same thing in the first book. I can't believe that I didn't think about that. Nice catch. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
exactly right.
and there's a really strong colleague call out there because later Dany has a dream of Miriam's door with a dragon popping out of her forehead, which is the whole Kali trick. She emanates from other goddesses like Durga and comes out of the forehead. So very specific Kali references there. And I do have a collection of notes on that I need to put into an essay. It's possible that it might fit into the symbolic foreshadowing, but I might just do a whole separate Kali Dany thing because it's really interesting. But in any case, tons of nice comments for you, Alisa, in the chat. Thank you very much. Again, yes, you knocked it out of the park. Everyone really appreciated it. A great debut. Sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking being on the live stream the first time, but you are like an old pro. You did great. So
Thank you. I worked really hard, and I'm glad everybody at least enjoyed it, if not found some merit in it. And it's all you. You did all the work. I just threw my notes at you. So.
Oh, now you brought a lot to the table. I really appreciate it. And anytime you can outflank me and find a mythical correlation that I missed, you get
Okay.
you win instant aplomb and approval from the myth heads. So
yay, myth heads! Appreciate it. That's my greatest achievement.
So thanks a lot, mods. Thanks to everyone who came by. And I will, again, look out in March for a ton of videos from me and Quinn's ideas. They'll be alternating on each of our channels. It'll start sometime in the first week of March. You'll hear all about it. And we're working very hard behind the scenes to bring all that stuff to you. So here, once again, is Alisa's WordPress link. I'll add that to the description in the video. And that's it. Happy Sunday.
And also hashtag Daenerys is a hot girl for Bernie.
Yes. Feel the burn, Dracarys. All right. See ya.
See ya.